All right, we're back. It is April 26, 2022. We are in Studio 3 here at Sunset Sound. We're joined by the two Pauls. Sunset Sound owner Paul Camerata makes his triumphant return, and one of the greatest audio specialists in the world, Mr. Paul Wolff. How is everybody?
Oh, me? I'm good. I'm
Good
glad
to
be
see you.
here. Yeah, we go way back.
You could say that. Should we even date ourselves?
Here's the thing. I remember we all went to dinner one time, and we all were sitting around the table. We had that room at the country club. We were having dinner, and I said,
Malbec? Was that it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so we were talking about how long we knew each other, and I said, oh, yeah, I've known Paul for like 30 years. And you go like, I think it's like 47, and that was 10 years ago.
I was like, no, let me correct you. I know.
42
It's been
years of friendship, right?
A long-term associate, at least.
I think
42, 43.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you had your office across the street for some time.
Yeah, at the Crossroads.
Was that API or was that
No, that was
Tone
just me.
Launch, or-
I had that over there when I had Fix Audio.
Okay.
And I did a lot of consulting out of that office. I absolutely love that place. It's so cool. I used to always look at that place from here when I would come to see you, and I would go, and there was so much of the Scientologists that owned so much of everything, here,
Yes.
that I thought that was like one of their headquarters. And then someone finally told me the story about that place, and it's actually, the story is incredible. It's a gangster used to own it in the 20s.
Really?
And he was murdered in the back corner of the property.
Oh, I didn't know
And
that.
yeah, and so his wife built that facility. His wife always had this vision, of shopping and restaurants and housing. She built that facility, and she made each building architecturally designed from one of the countries that she visited when she was with him.
Oh.
And she would visit these countries on the cruise ship, which is the middle building.
Yeah, it is a nautical
and that's
theme.
that's the ship.
Yep.
And the very front of it. Now, if you go into Disneyland, the very first store that you see where you can buy stuff is a blue awning, and it goes up like that, and it has the globe turning, and Mickey Mouse is standing on top of it. Mm-hmm. And what's funny is that everybody knows that in their hometown, there's always a Crossroads shopping center. And if you go around the country, it's literally everywhere. The first one who gets it, it has the place. And she came up with this idea of having shops on the ground floor and apartments and offices above it. And it was basically the invention of the basically not a strip mall, but a mall that was not enclosed. And that's what it was. And she did that out of respect for her husband.
Wow.
So that was in 1927 or something.
What gangster was it?
I have no idea. I don't know. But I mean, so the history of that place goes way back to then, and then it became Hollywood. I mean, that's where screenwriters and composers and everybody that had to do with the film industry. Alfred Hitchcock had the top floor of the right hand building all the way at the back, the whole top floor. The guy that does the album covers, Kosh.
Was he there?
He has a place over there.
Oh,
He's got a
didn't
whole
know
place
that.
that's got every picture of every album he ever did. Sheila Jaffe, the casting agent, her office was right across from mine.
I know her.
And you'd walk out into the hallway, and there'd be like 6 women that all kind of look the same, and they're all waiting for an audition. And then 20 minutes later, you'd go out, and there'd be like 6 little kids, and they all look the same, and they're all going for an audition. And it was just continuous all day. You'd run into Mark Wahlberg. He'd be walking up, and because she did all of his stuff.
She still does, yeah.
So it was, so it became
It's an iconic place.
It became like Hollywood. That was where everything was done out of. And then a lot of those offices moved to the lots, and that just kind of got run down. And then the guy who owns it now bought it and immediately got it set up as a historical building.
Right.
So that's why when they build all that crap next to it, that's going to stay, and they're going to restore it.
They can't touch the building.
They're going to restore it,
Right.
which is going to be really cool. So then now, up until when they announced it, a lot of people left, but there were still people in there, and I was only paying $400 a month rent, and I had
Good
2
deal.
parking spots inside a gated place. I mean, he didn't care. He just wanted to have it filled. He wanted nice people. You couldn't just walk in the office and rent something. Somebody had to recommend you if you wanted to get in there.
Oh,
There's
wow.
no directory. There's probably maybe 7 or 8 recording studios over there.
I think I remember the first time I went there, sometime in the 70s, later 70s, Graham Nash had a studio there.
That's the building.
Rudy,
that's the separate building.
Rudy Records.
And that used to be an Argentinian restaurant.
Yeah, they had a studio there for many years. Not sure what he did there, but obviously his stuff or Crosby, Stills, Nash.
He did some stuff, yeah, and then the guys over there took it over and they put a big dead SSL in there.
Right.
But it's a nice sounding room. It was all built incorrectly, but it was nice. It was a nice sounding room. It has a vibe to it that's pretty cool. And it's still an active studio.
Yeah.
Had you ever heard David Geffen was in there?
I'm sure. I mean, all these people were in there at one point. I mean, everybody was because it was the place to be.
Alice Cooper shot as the record cover of Muscle of Love in there too. Did you know that? And they tracked that
when
record
they were
here in
recording
Studio
here,
One.
They went over there.
Well, they did that movie Argo.
No way. That's where John Goodman.
They start the movie out right at the bus stop.
Yep.
On this side of the
Like
street.
a period piece.
You knew that?
This side of the street, and they start out by panning up to the globe, and then they switch into like the 4th office down from the right is where that script was originally written, and the CIA went there and they said, we need a script for a movie because we want to get these guys out of there, and the only way we can do it is if we go in as a film crew and all this kind of stuff. And they wrote the whole script there, they worked it all out, and then they all went over there. And there was a lot of you talk about pre-development for a project. All those guys, they had to create a history, so if they looked them up, they had a history. They had all these fake credentials for all these people and stuff like that, and they did get them out, and they were literally seconds away from being discovered.
Wow.
They were in the air because they had shredded everything, and in those days, the shredders only did vertical shredding. They didn't do cross-cut stuff.
So
they were
put
taping,
it back together.
They were taping all the pictures of everybody together, and they figured out who they were as the plane left the ground. It was quite an exciting movie, and it's a very true story.
Oh yeah.
But that script was written there. You know, so there was a lot of really cool things that came out of that place. You know, so
Moving on to you, you're in Nashville now. You lived out in California for a long time. You've been out here 4 days. I saw you at Sunset in a Sunset Sound T-shirt. I saw you on Steven Slate's IG over at Greg Wells' house, who's a gigantic producer. Are you considered one of the most important people to know in audio? And that's a serious question.
I got in. I had a VIP pass given to me by Jay Gordon.
Oh yeah, you're at the Rainbow 50th
at
anniversary.
the Rainbow 50th anniversary party. I went into that, and there was a line 2 blocks down, and they had to stop letting people in, and so Jay was there. He said to come down, and so I called him. And
does he play an orgy?
That's his band.
Okay.
Yeah, that's his band. And they're a good band, man. They rock the place. I didn't get to see them, but I heard them from the street, and it was just bam, bam, bam. You know, they're such a good band. And he's such a nice guy, man. What a sweetheart he is. You know?
But people say, though, that you're one of the most important people to know in audio. Even before I met you a few years ago, a mutual friend, Jacob Skiba, consulted with you about that hybrid board they did at Arlen Studios down there. I mean, everybody comes to you when they need something. How would you define what you do in the audio world?
I don't know.
Design to engineering to...
I mean, my whole thing of design is I want to make something that's easy. I want to make something, and that you guys are like that too. These boards, you could just make a record on it. There was nothing in the board that was in the way of anything that you tried to do. And I learned a lot being around people like you and Eric and all those people that were building consoles in those days, Frank DiMedio and all those kind of people, that it was just, what do you need? Not what do you want, but what do you need? And so my whole philosophy was I always wanted to build something that had 70% of the features, but I would do it 100% of the way, instead of where most of these people would do 100% of the features and they'd do them 70% of the way. So my whole philosophy was that. Now, and the companies that I've had, I've always done similar things, but I've always tried to do them differently and accomplish the same thing, and, creating new sounds and stuff like that. And the ability, to design something in this industry. I mean, at the level that we're at, you can't just design something and say, here. You have to have somebody, you got to be somebody that's had a reputation that people know. And so when they hand it to you, they're actually going to use it. And it has to be good because anybody can make a mic pre, and everybody does.
Right.
But the ones that really have the sound that makes that's the glue that holds stuff together, there's certain aspects that you have to know, you know. And those are things that I was taught. I was taught by my friendship with Saul Walker, which was, the guy was just. If there's
Designed at API for those who don't.
Well, yeah, he and Lou Lindau and a couple other guys started API back in the day, and they were huge. And this is important to say because there was API. There was a lot of companies like Sound Techniques and all those companies. They never made it to the point where they were making hundreds of consoles.
Right.
But you had like API and you had Neve, and there was a few that were doing that. And what happened to both of those companies, which is interesting, was that when they started out doing this kind of stuff, it was like you guys needed a custom console, these guys needed a custom console. There weren't that many studios, but when the studio thing started, where people started building studios, everybody needed a console because the old consoles were just broadcast consoles. And a lot of the reason everything was mono because you had a program and an audition switch. And in the early days of stereo, they would just do audition for one channel and program for the other channel. And you had left and you had right. And so they didn't have pan pots then, Yeah. So that's why a lot of that early stuff was that way. A lot of the early stuff, because it was written, it was recorded in mono tracks. They could, they didn't have pan pots. They had to put the drums on one side. This is one of the things with the Beatles. And I had a chance to ask George Martin this question one time at a trade show. And I came up to him and everybody's always saying, it's like, oh, I love this record. He did it like that. And I said, I have a very specific question to ask you. And he's like, interesting. And I said, so the tambourine in the Beatles stuff, was it because they liked the tambourine a lot, or is it because it added balance to the drums? And he kind of looked surprised. He said, well, there are some instances where the tambourine was what we needed to add to it. But there were other instances because when stereo came out, stereo had not taken off in Europe yet, but in the United States it was huge. And EMI basically said, we need everything in stereo, and we need it tomorrow. So he said nobody really knew what to do with stereo. So they would put some stuff on one side and some stuff on the other. And since your drum tracks were mono, you had to put them on one side or the other. So it really made it sound heavy. So by putting a tambourine on the other side, it balanced it out.
Yeah.
So, here's a medical procedure for a tambourine. Everybody uses a tambourine because the Beatles used tambourines, but they didn't use it entirely because they wanted to. They did it because they needed to balance out the tracks. Now, another thing about those early days, of the early mono days, is Jeff Emmerich said that in a lot of the mixes that they did, because all those Beatle tracks are floating around on the internet, you can download a lot of them. But he said that a lot of those tracks that are floating around, on all of them, there's like one track missing. And he said there were instances when they would have to do something live while they were mixing, or they added something right at the last minute and flew it in, that those didn't make it with the masters,
Oh.
And this is true with any piece of equipment out there. The guy at Pultec did not design the Pultec equalizer because he thought it'd be cool. And he thought, oh my God, people are going to just think this is the greatest EQ of all time. Somebody came up to him and said, I have a problem. I need you to do this. And so he would design an EQ that had, bass cut and treble boost. And then somebody else would say, well, we'd like to be able to adjust the mid-range. So he'd come up with the, XB-1. And then the XB-2, and then the -2A, because it was kind of like the -2, but it had just one little extra thing. And it builds like that. Now these things are legendary because they were built correctly. They were built by people that knew what they were doing, And so nowadays, people build, more of the stuff is built to be cool than it is built
For functionality.
and for reason, So, and that a lot of the older equipment was like that. And a lot of the innovation in electronics was like that. And that's how I was taught by Saul Walker, my friendship with him, because this guy was the smartest guy I ever met in my life. You would sit there and go like, I like your shirt. And he'd go, yeah, he says, this gold embroidery was invented by a guy and da-da-da-da-da. And the original gold was used to do, kind of like when I tell stories and shit like that, people go like, And he knew everything about everything. He said, oh, that was a company called so-and-so. And they found out they did this by plating this with that. And, I mean, you ask him anything. And the same thing with Rupert. But both of these guys, okay, they started making consoles, and everybody needed a console. So they sold hundreds of consoles. And then there's a point when everybody had a console.
Then what?
Then what do you do? Well, API was they were in a grade school. That's how big their place was. And Neve was in 2 or 3 different facilities. They had a huge facility, and they built consoles. And it kind of brick walled. Everybody kind of hit this wall where it kind of slowed down. Yeah. And you weren't building 3 consoles a month anymore, but your whole infrastructure was based around that. So a lot of these guys started having the same problems at that same time, because you went from everybody wanting to be everybody needing a console to only your newest customer and your oldest customer. And that was it. And from that point on, that's all you had. You didn't have everybody else. So, and it brought about the demise of both companies. And both companies had ups and downs at different points, And, and so API, they ended up going out of business.
Let's get to that, though. Let's talk about the history of, one, your guys' friendship, but also let's incorporate the studio, because Sunset Sound started in 1958 with Studio 1. 67, Studio 2 is built. 1976, Studio 3 comes on board because we're so busy here. That solidifies Sunset Sound as a complete API house. 1980, Mr. Camerata here wants to design this a console for Studio 1, correct?
Yeah, so around the late 70s, after Studio 1, 2, and 3 were online, we started to see that Studio 1 was getting to the point that the board was at the saturation point of anything more we could do to it, and we needed a larger board. This kind of dovetails into how I met Paul. This room came online in 76.
Yeah.
This room originally was a mixing room only. We did not have this space. Audio Rents was in this space, the company that we co-owned.
Yep.
And so it came online around 76. By 77, we were getting so many requests to have a third tracking room, we decided to move them out and basically build a studio in here and tie it into the control room. Well, the board was a mixing board. So it was like, it didn't have a monitor section. It only had 12 mic pre's, and they were like 312 API mic pre's. So we were like, oh gosh, we've got to, we got to deal with this. So that's when my father assembled this team. It was Don Wolford, it was Dean Jensen, and it was Eric Benton, who was our head chief tech engineer here. And the first thing we needed to do was design a mic pre for the Studio 3 console, because we needed
more
32 mic pre's.
Right.
And we didn't want to go with the 312 necessarily. So these guys brainstormed and over a period of time came up with the 990 dual op amp Sunset, what we call the Tootie now, mic pre. And those first were installed in Studio 3. That was the first placement of those mic pre's. Probably around 1978.
Now the Tootie was named after your father.
When you packaged it for me and we put it in the 500 series rack, we both decided we wanted to pay homage to my father, so we named it the Tootie.
Right.
Very cool.
And because he was a trumpet player and had a band called Camerata, right?
He was a trumpet player, but he was in the Jimmy Dorsey band.
Okay.
Yeah, as a teenager. So, and he was the arranger, but we won't get into that. So anyway, going back to Studio 3, so we build the mic pre's, and then we're at the point where, okay, we've got the Studio 3 console working, Studio 3's online, and my father's like, we still need a console for Studio 1. We have to, we got to, and we don't want to go buy one. There was really nothing on the market we were interested in. We weren't going to do the SSL route.
Well, SSL wasn't.
I'm not even sure they were around.
They weren't quite, I don't think, quite. Maybe in the early version, but they weren't quite there.
Well, we weren't going to do the Neve route. Everybody had the V, and it was just like, oh, get it. That just wasn't us. So, and Trident, or we'd never been anything else. So, he said, we got to build a console. He was adamant about that. So he put, like I said, he put that design team together for the mic pre's. So then they morphed into the console building business, and he said, we've got to build we're going to build a sidecar first and see how it works. So that's what we did. We built a 12-channel sidecar first, and then after we tested that and used it, and we were very happy with it, and it was all based around the 990 op amp, which I guess Dean Jensen was involved with, and that was the new op amp at the time.
Like a design from the 60s that he took and updated to something that was a little more packageable and operational.
Right.
Yeah.
So we started building the console. So that was probably around 79, started going into production on that.
God, I remember coming and visit you and seeing that console every year, turned upside down.
I think that took about 4 or 5 years to build.
Yeah, it was a long time.
That was a big money drain, let me tell you. Plus, nobody wanted to be out of a job afterwards, so they just sort of stretched it out.
It's one of those pictures where you have the time-lapse studio, picture of the console being built, and you see like trees growing, buildings burning down, being rebuilt, skyscrapers going up, cars.
Time-lapse kind of thing, yeah.
They go from like old cars to new cars, people like hair growing on their faces and stuff like that, and the console is just sitting there with wires being added.
Just, one at a time.
One at a time.
So anyway, they're building the console, and we get around to the point of, we need EQs for the console, so we better order some APIs because this is an API house. We've got basically 3 API custom boards in each room, and I remember Bill Robinson. He was our manager at the time, and he put in a PO to Everything Audio. That was the API dealer in town, and we were trying to conserve obviously money, and we didn't need all 65 or whatever it was, API, 550s at the time. So I think we were ordering in banks of 8. So he puts in a PO for the first 8, I remember that, and they come in and they take them in the shop, and we pull them out of the box, and they're like, oh, look at these brand new 550As. I mean, they look great. I mean, the knobs, the faceplates, and everything. So, well, let's open one up. Let's take a look. So slide the cover off, and everybody just looks at each other, and we're just like dumbfounded. It's like, what? That's not a 550A. It's like a single op amp. It doesn't have the lead-in switches, and it's a completely different circuit. And we're like, what is this? And somewhere etched on the panel or the circuit board, it says 550A-1 by Datronics. And so I remember Bill calls up the guy, Brian Cornfield, I think, I
remember Brian.
At Everything Audio, and says, what the fuck did you send us? Oh, can I say that?
Yeah, Elon owns Twitter now. We can say anything we want.
He said, what did you send us? He goes, well, we just got those shipment from API. That's their latest version. We're like, well, we don't want the latest version. We want the original version. So,
in other words, what we ordered?
What we ordered, exactly. So something happens where it's a little murky in my mind, but they come back and go, well, those aren't available right now. And, when are they going to be available? Well, we're not sure. So we send the 550A-1s back, and we're kind of waiting. And it's not like,
you put a PO in for like 250 of them or something.
No, this is for the console. So
okay.
We put a PO for 60 of them, I think, in. But so they don't come, and we keep checking on it. And meanwhile, we got a lot of time because the console's several years down the road, But
it'll be done next week. It'll be
done next week. I promise. So anyway, the EQs don't come, and then we hear API has gone out of business. It's gone. And that's why they didn't come, because they were just moving out, I think, what they had. And anyway, so they're gone. So I remember we had a meeting, and we're like, what are we going to do? Are we going to, we have to have API 550As for our console. Are we going to have to buy these on the used market? I mean, we'll put old EQs in a brand new console? So I remember going, well, what was the deal with that EQ? It said made by Datronics. I'm like, who is Datronics? So I call them up and I find out and I start talking to them and they said, well, we're a subcontractor for API. We do stuff for them. And I said, well, I've got an EQ, not like you make, but similar. Would you be interested in building it for me? And they said, well, why don't you come out and talk to us? So I grabbed an EQ, not that day, but made plans, went back to Datronics, which is in Reston, Virginia.
Yeah.
And that's when I met the suits, as I like to call them. It was really a different world for us because everyone was wearing a suit, you know. Maybe you weren't, but
I wasn't. But yeah, Atlantic Research.
Yeah,
and,
Atlantic.
They were like really. They were stuffed shirts.
They were almost kind of Mormon-esque. You know?
Well, the owner, the president of the company, was a Mormon, and he had like.
Oh, he was.
Yeah, he was.
Oh, okay. Maybe
yeah.
that's why I'm thinking that.
But everybody else was. But there were some really cool people there. There was a guy, and I can't for the life of me remember everybody's name, but there was a guy who invented the flip-flop that was used in the original computers after they went from tubes. And he had one of them on his desk. There was another guy that was a naval engineer who designed submarines and grounding systems in submarines and stuff like that. And they all worked for Atlantic Research.
Yeah, I remember they had a communication systems for the destroyers.
They had, they had 4 divisions. They had the solid rocket booster division. They had the data patch division. They had, different things like that. And this was the people who made the data control systems.
Yeah.
And they did a data control system for, I think, a destroyer. And when they sent it to them, it didn't work. And the only way that the military could get a budget to have them build another one to finish it, because it went way over budget and they just had to have it, is they sunk the ship and then went, we're going to have to build another one.
Oh boy.
So they came back and then they built it correctly. But it was really bizarre. And I was working at a studio in DC at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a synclavier. We had one of the first synclaviers. And then we did a seminar, and there was a guy showed up that said there's a company in Reston that builds, API stuff. And we had 3 550s in our rack, and I remember using them on everything. I'm going like, oh my God, I just love the way these sound,
Yeah.
So I used them on everything I ever recorded. And, this guy says, well, they need to, should go out there. And our studio was changing hands. So I went out there and applied for a job, and I got it because they had just discovered where you just left off.
Yeah.
They were at a point where it's like, well, maybe we should start building this stuff because there's a market.
Well, so I'll move forward with the EQ. So I come.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
So are you and your dad freaking out, though? Because you own a studio with 3 rooms and they all have API components in there. So now you've kind of
relatively good amount of freaking out,
a bit. Say. There was always the alternate that we could go to the used market, although buying 60 EQs on the used market back then would have been difficult.
It would have been difficult. Yeah, nobody was selling them. There was
nobody
no reason
was,
to sell
unless
them.
they were, piecing out a console or something. So
people hadn't started even doing that yet.
No, they hadn't, because things were too new. But anyway, so I showed them the EQ, and they said, well, can you leave it with us, and we'll get back to you. And I guess they analyzed it, probably with you and other people.
That was right when I started.
Do you remember that too? Obviously,
I remember that.
So they come back and they said, we can do this, but it won't be exactly in the configuration it is now, because we can't do these lead-X switches with the hardwired components on it. It's just not cost effective, especially for the amount of units you need. So I said, well, what can you do then? They said, well, we can redesign it electrically exactly the same and repackage it. And but we don't have access to 2520 op amps. And so at that point, I think we decided, well, let's make it in line with the console, which the whole console was 990s op amps. So we decided to design the new 550A for Sunset Sound with a 990, and then the Jensen by Rickenbacker transformer that we were putting in throughout the whole console, because the API components weren't available, and they would also mirror what's in the console. So that's what we did. And I had to pay him a design fee, which I believe we owned.
Yeah.
because it was specific to us, and they couldn't sell them to anyone else. It was just a contract for us to do a build of like 60, and we started building them. So somewhere along the line there, they had an idea that, wow, they were, I remember they wanted to see our financials and stuff like that, and they were like, "Oh, this is a good business to be in," and at the time, and they were like,
little do they know.
yeah. So
You made all your money from the sign on the roof. And
yeah.
Right.
But they come back to me and they said, we're thinking about maybe getting in the audio business, which you probably know a little more about than I do. But and I'm like, what do you mean? They said, well, we're thinking about resurrecting all the API products. I go, really? You are? And they said, yeah. I go, like what? Well, like the modules for the consoles and like everything, the oscillator, the all the whole EQ range, the compressor. I go, so basically everything. What about consoles? And they were like, well, no, but that came later. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, this is great. I remember, so I go back and talk to my dad, and they're like, he's like, we got to get in on this. so we go back to them, and then we're like, we're all for it. We're all 100%, and we can help you sell the product.
Whoa.
And they said, you can? I said, absolutely. So they made us the West Coast distributor for the new API line. And then they needed a marketing guy. Well, they needed a lot of guys, and you probably can fill this in, but they needed a lot of guys. They needed a marketing guy, and we had a marketing guy here that worked for us in the 60s named Larry Blakely, because
Larry,
because we were an Ampex distributor.
breaking out in hives. No.
I know. But we couldn't get Ampex tape machines. They were like hen's teeth back then. It was like they just didn't make that many. So we decided to become a dealer. And that way, we had access to Ampex tape machines, so we could get the 8, 16, 24 tracks. Because I remember renting 24 tracks from Wally Hyder because we couldn't buy one, like a 3M or something. Anyway, so they hire Larry Blakely, and then they hire the Godfather Saul Walker. Anyway, so I'll let you fill in after.
Hold on one second, though. You indirectly resurrected API.
Pretty much.
Pretty much.
I mean,
API
would not be here today.
Yeah,
90% sure.
I told Larry Dropa, the current owner, that story, and he kind of gave me a dazed in the headlight look, like, really?
Got my royalty?
Like, really? I said, if we hadn't have wanted those EQs,
of course,
that company could have.
They would have never got it. They would have
gone
never got it because
down.
I wouldn't get hired there. Saul would have never got hired there.
No, nobody. Larry Blakely, the API would have never been resurrected, and it really comes down to us needing those EQs.
Right.
That why API
Definitely.
came back from the dead.
And that's when they put together the team of Lou Hansen, who ended up working for me later on. Lou is one of the smartest people I know as well. Saul Walker was first, but then they hired Lou Hansen, Pete Barthelson, myself, a few other people. I was in the test department. I was the head guy there because I'd worked on consoles because I mixed records and stuff. So they had everybody that was there knew stuff about hi-fi audio or stuff. And like Lou and Pete designed a new op amp, the 2525, it had a couple of errors in it, but it was a great op amp. And so, and I learned a lot from those guys too. When I designed the Tonelux op amp, I designed it from what I learned from those guys. And that is a sweet op amp. But so those guys, so they put together that team and they started doing that. What they needed to be able to do, because these guys, this is Atlantic Research. These guys, they built data patches and stuff like that. And what happened was...
Not the audio world.
No, it wasn't the audio world, but they got... The overhead was so high, and the data patching in those days were these like modular patch bays for data. And it was very competitive. And they weren't able to compete. So they spun off a bunch of people, and they were basically the people they wanted to get rid of, okay? Spun them off to start Datronics as a contract house to build the data patch system. And they had a guy there. I don't remember the guy's name, but this guy was just like, he was one of these fucking mechanical geniuses that could make anything. And he made this press that the two halves of the data patch case were plastic, and one had a pin and one had a hole. And this thing, you'd set it down and it'd go, and it would melt the tips of the plastic and, like turn them into rivets, and all this kind of stuff.
Wow.
So they said, okay, we need to make the switches. We need to put the switches on headers so we can test the switches. So when we go to manufacturing, they can just put the switches in the EQs and they're done. And so we made these test fixtures that they put the switch in, had this thing that held it in place, and then we had knobs that had thumb screws on them, so you could put the knobs on, and then there were LEDs that were set up with the right resistor value. So as you turned it, it would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 like that, and you could test the switches in a matter of seconds. No, there was a pass-fail thing. That it was very accurate.
Wow.
So they had that, and then they had to add the current thing because the impedance of the input of those 990s needed to be lower, and the circuit was very high. So they had to build a little current circuit to put in there for the 990s. But they made it so you could leave it out if you wanted to put a 2520 in. Now the reason the 2520 didn't exist was because it wasn't. They didn't not have the 2520s. They just hadn't made any. And they didn't think they were ever going to make any. So they just never did. So that's why it was like, whatever. So the 560, when the 560A came out, they did that. That was actually Doug Simon at Studio Consultants that got them to build that. But they built it with the IC and the power transistors because they didn't know if the 560, the 2520 was going to be around either.
Yeah.
So the difference between that EQ and the 560 was a slightly different circuit. The original 560 had kind of a lopsided bell shape, which gave it kind of a characteristics. The new one was pretty even. But the 550A, which they ended up calling the Dash 1, was basically very similar to a switch selectable version of the 560A.
They didn't think you'd pick up on that when they gave you the Dash 1s?
I think that's all they had.
See, there's no conspiracy behind this. This is the thing that's interesting. Everybody blamed Datronics for the 550A-1, and it was originally API.
Yeah.
And API was trying to get the cost of the 550A down, because if you've ever opened one of those things up, it is a fucking mess.
Labor
inside.
intensive.
But what a cool design. But it was, resistor for every position, and you had a Q resistor for every position, and it was, there was a lot of stuff on those switches. So it was not easy to make. And by putting them on headers, they were able to plug in. If you had a bad one, you could replace it. If you wanted to clean them, you could clean them, whatever, as long as you didn't give them to Brent Averill. Those who know will know.
We'll get that.
So they started doing that. And then when you brought back when you brought early on, because I had just started working there. And when you brought the EQ back in, I listened to it, and I thought, these really don't sound right. There's something weird about them. So I dug out this old Hewlett-Packard Spectrum analyzer they had, and I put it on the Spectrum analyzer. And I discovered that they were constant Q.
The 558-1.
The 558-1, which basically means that as you boost it, it goes like this.
Didn't have a bell curve.
Just like a 550, like a 560. It was a fixed curve.
Yeah.
Where the 550A goes like this. Okay. And the interesting thing about the 550A is if you invert it so it's cutting, if you filled this with water, as you cut it, it held the same amount of water because it got deeper and narrower. So you call it kind of an equal energy equalizer, because the amount of energy in that bucket is the same. But the cool thing is that if you clicked at 2 dB, it was this very wide, broad lift of everything around it. It was almost like, I think it was 2.5 octaves or maybe even 3. So I looked at it on the Spectrum analyzer, and it was like, and I went, Saul, you better come over and see this. Okay, so Saul walked over, and he looked at it, and he had that look on his face like, holy shit, I forgot about that.
Did he design the 550A-1?
Well, no, there was another guy who did it, but what they did when they tested it is they tested it
Just the
at
frequencies.
0 and full up and the frequencies. And they boosted it up to that point, and the frequency didn't vary, because any of those types of EQs, and this is actually an interesting fun fact. There's only like 6 to 8 equalization designs. There's the twin T filter, there's a state variable, there's like Massenburg's twin T parametric type EQ. When you design an EQ, you got to pick one of those. Okay. And one of the rules with the older equalizers, and the reason all of the old EQs sound the way they do, is because when you had a capacitor and an inductor in a circuit, as you change the boost and cut, you're changing the impedance on the top of it. So you had to make up that difference on the bottom. And as you increase the resistance on the bottom, the Q widens in that circuit, okay, if you want to keep that frequency in the center position. So it was kind of the reason that all old EQs sounded warm like that, was because of that. You basically had to do that. Now, it wasn't until the invention of what they call a gyrator, which was an IC circuit that simulates an inductor, that was stable with impedance, that changed, and they started coming out with constant Q equalizers. So nobody really knew. Like the guys at Pultec, if you wanted to make an EQ, you had to compensate on the bottom of the tank circuit what you had at the top. So if this was 10K, that would be 0. It'd be very narrow. And if you had to go like this, and you had to go like that to make it so it's always 10K. So as you clicked it through, but the more resistance on the bottom, the further away from the ground that circuit became, and the circuit basically becomes more relaxed. So it's a lot broader. It's not as peaky. So the 550A, the old Pultecs, all those old EQs were all proportional Q equalizers. Unknowingly, it was just the way they had to be. When they came out with a new one, it wasn't like known either that, these are going to be fixed Qs. When I showed that to Saul, he went, like I said, he just went like, oh my God, I didn't even think of that. And that's when we discovered what they were. By that time, you were stuck with 250 of them.
Because, as a dealer.
As a dealer,
yes,
right.
We were selling them. Well, they were a low-cost alternative version to a 550A.
Yeah, and you know what? To be clear,
it was a good, solid EQ.
Yeah, it was. It was a good EQ. It wasn't an A. It was like a 3-band 560, but it was still a very good equalizer.
I mean, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it seemed like an A was like $900 or $1,000, and those 550As were $300.
Yeah.
Dash ones,
The Dash ones,
and,
right.
And so someone that had a API console that had been gutted, or somebody wanted a little lunch box or whatever, they could buy a pretty nice EQ for a reasonable amount of money.
The shelving on that was fine.
Yeah.
And there was nothing wrong with the
But
shelving.
for us, it wasn't going to work.
Now, there's one really cool thing about that, about the new EQ. When they designed the new EQ, the little square buffer board that had the transistors.
Oh, right. Because
they wanted to put the buffers on a board as well.
Because it is great for servicing.
Yeah, and what a lot of people don't know is that pinout of the socket is a TLO74.
It's a chip pinout.
It's a TLO74 pinout. So you could take a TLO74, plug it in there, and test the EQ to see if it worked. And in an emergency, you could use that. It did sound a little different, but it wasn't like awful. If you needed to do that, you could do that. But that was something that a lot of people don't realize. That's one of the things that we did, is we made sure that there was like some compatibility. There were a lot of smart people that worked at
No, that was a
Datronics.
great repackaging, because if you ever take a 550A, like I see the guys in the shop, they're trying to replace those transistors or check which one's bad. It's a nightmare. But with the little daughter board where you just pop it off and you can work right on it, or it's easy to pop a new one on.
The other thing is that Texas Instruments made a transistor series called the TIS series. And they were like TIS 92s, TIS 74s, all these different transistors. But they were reversed. All transistors nowadays, the standard for a small package transistor is emitter-based collector.
Yeah.
They were collector-based emitter. So if you took one of the old ones out and you looked up an equivalent, it might say, a 2N whatever, and you pop it back in, it doesn't work because you have to turn it around. So this was no fault of them. This is just like a company thinking, let's make them this way, and it's like, why? Everybody else makes them the other way. It's like, what is wrong with you people? But so that's the discovery of that particular thing. It was with the spectrum analyzer. And every time I see one of those spectrum analyzers on eBay or something, they're huge. I'm so tempted to buy one just because it was like a turning point in the history of audio. Was that device changed the world, you know? And so that's when they discovered it, and that's when they started. They told you were there like 2 days after that.
Yeah.
And I think I might have even showed you the difference.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
A little green screen, and
Yeah.
it's like you know, like this, and it was like,
curves.
oh my God, you know. And that's the reason. And they didn't know, nobody knew. Datronics got the blame for that because they were the ones that publicly put them out, because API kind of went out of business right as you got.
Right.
The
It was the
first few.
Datronics EQ.
Yeah, that's what they got blamed for, and they came out with everything else. They started. They released the 560A,
Right.
which was, it didn't sound great because it didn't have a transformer. You could get it transformerless.
Yeah, we have some of those.
And in the early days, pin 15, which I turned into the 48 volt phantom power pin, was the direct output of the amplifier. So you had, that's why there's an orange sticker in all the lunch boxes that say caution. If you have an old 560, cut pin 15, because if you plug it into this, it's going to back into the amplifier and blow it up.
Oh, nice.
And it's still there. They still put it in there because there's always going to be that guy that has one that's going to plug it in and go, you know. So that's, you know. But, you know, the other thing, though, when you came up with that, in the days that you did that, there were no 500 series modules. There was a company called Troisi that made a really cool dynamic 3-band EQ that had a compressor threshold knob and then frequency and boost, which was very cool. And they were actually next to me at one of the trade shows that we were at. And then there was APSI, who came up with the little click, click, click graphic EQ switch.
Oh.
And the thing that was interesting about that equalizer,
I remember that one,
is most EQs start from 0 and they move out like this. That EQ is like a graphic equalizer turned up all the way, except the levels were turned down, so they were at 0. So even at 0, the response was like this, because there were these tuned things that you just moved up and down in level. It's a very strange equalizer, but great for guitar because they always sounded like they were up all the way. But that EQ had the API symbols on it, and it was called a 559. And they sold them to API. They made a deal with API that they could be the only people that could sell them other than them putting them in consoles. And in return, they put the API
logo?
spears on
Wow.
the EQ. That was it. There were no 500 series. And so when we started making, after I bought API and we started making the racks that we just created at Datronics, it was Pete, myself, and Lou and Saul, because right then was when everybody started. We talked about this earlier before we were on, but everybody started parting out consoles, and they needed racks to put them in.
lunchbox.
We built our
things.
own out of a Vero rack, and that's what everybody was doing. So we actually made the first 500 series rack there. And, you know, and then of course everybody knows this by now, but the lunchbox was created by Aphex to sell their modules, and people were buying the lunchboxes but not their modules. And so when Marvin Caesar, who was a good friend of mine, he was going to discontinue it when I owned API, I asked him if he would mind if I started making them. And it was, I believe it was Art Kelm who came up with coined the name Lunchbox.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, because he was selling them. He was selling like what's his face from Journey.
Steve Perry?
Steve Perry
Yeah.
had a lunchbox that had a mic pre EQ compressor and a little fader that he had made for him, so he could. That was his recording.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was his recording thing. So with his U47 and that box, didn't matter what studio he went into, it was his sound. That was his guitar.
Wow, that's
was
cool.
it.
And that was
Paul knows him really
and so
well.
everybody was buying the
Wow.
lunch boxes and not use. Well, Art was buying most of them, but and
Yeah.
he was building them. At that time, that was when the first ISDN lines came out. So a lot of these voiceover guys were working from their homes. So they would have a little lunchbox and their microphone, a little sound booth thing, and they would do their live broadcast stuff or their ad copy from home.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where that came about. And then when that started to become a popular item, then people started making modules to go into them. And what really took that whole industry off was when the EU started the whole RoHS thing, where they're lead-free, cadmium-free, all that stuff.
Right.
And you had to have safety regulations for power and stuff like that. In the early days, it would cost you $20,000 to get certified for a power supply. So by people making a module that fit in that rack, they were able to go around all those regulations.
Because it was low voltage.
Because it was already
I remember
powered.
that gear had to be UL approved. Because I remember one of the reasons we relocated Audio Rents from here to West LA, city of West Hollywood, I mean, they were out of the city of LA because the city of LA was actually, they had inspectors that were going around to studios and film places and checking to see if the equipment was UL approved.
Right, and then they came up with their own
Yeah.
approval, and they had their own Los Angeles City approval. They used to come to the trade shows.
Oh,
They'd
Wow.
come around to the trade shows, and everybody was just like, fuck you.
Yeah, you know, it's like the tax collector.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden the EU came out with their stuff, and they eliminated. And you know, the sad thing about that is they came out with all this stuff, and then the early silver solder, and this is what they've realized is the reason everybody got away from silver solder in the 30s was because it was brittle, and stuff wasn't really close together in those days. But fast forward, when silver tarnishes, if you look at it under a microscope, it grows these little trees. Mm-hmm. And what would happen with these closely spaced chips is it would grow trees between them and short them out.
Short out the
Yeah,
the
and
leads.
plus the heat, because of the silver solder being 100 degrees hotter, the heat would melt just about every capacitor that existed on the face of the earth. So it was a nightmare. And it was brittle, vibration. I mean, Cinemag to this day, Cinemag Transformers still has, their only failures they ever have are small bridges from the solder or the wires, because when the wire would come out of the solder cone, there was some flex in there because it's a soft material. The silver was very hard, so it's a sharp point, so the wire would vibrate and snap off. That's the only kind of failure they had, and they eliminated that by putting a little dot of silicone on top of each solder connection to act as a cushion because of what that caused. And because of the higher temperature and the shorting and stuff, so they did this because of all the motherboards and the cell phones that were being thrown in the trash, all the lead. So what the first thing they did was they did a waiver to all the people that made computers and cell phones because they were shorting. So the people that they ruined everybody else's lives with this bullshit the guys that they did it for ended up getting a waiver.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So but this is all this stuff. All this stuff is interweaved. I mean, you talk about drama. You could do one of those the women of Hollywood type TV shows, but it would be like the engineers of regulations, and it was just like, why did this product go away? Well, it was probably some regulation or some thing. And why did the 558-1 sound so bad? It wasn't because somebody was out to get you. It was because they didn't know until I discovered it and showed them. And then everybody knew because they were all engineers and they knew anyway, but they just forgot. It was like you didn't think about that. You go, oh, did you turn off the oven before we left? No, I thought you did. Oh, I don't know. And then you drive 8 hours back and you find it's off,
Yeah, great.
For those that don't know, or maybe are wondering, define API sound. If we made a record here, you and I, and we were in Studio 2 on an Neve 8088, or in this room on that Frank Dominio API, if you have API components, how's the sound? Is it brighter? Is it clearer?
Both consoles, compared to some of the solid-state consoles, both consoles can come across as being a little darker, okay, just because of the transformers and stuff. That's just the way it is. Anytime you have introduce a transformer to something, you have what they call hysteresis, which is a lag of when you charge the transformer with current, it has to magnetize the core, so it goes up like this, and that ramp time causes a delay. So that affects things. That causes a distortion. Depending on how you drive the transformer, what type of amplifier drives the transformer, that distortion can be second harmonic, third harmonic, stuff like that. The API stuff was typically second harmonic. It was steel, and it had a nice second harmonic content in the low frequencies from like 300 on down. It went up quite steep. And if you increase the level, the distortion went up with it. The Neves, on the other hand, my Tone Lux stuff, a lot of people say my Tone Lux stuff sounded a lot like the Neve stuff. And my Tone Lux stuff I had a different type of amplifier driving the transformer. It wasn't an op-amp, it was a stable amplifier that had no gain. And because of that, there was very little interaction with the transformer. That transformer had primary third harmonic distortion, but it was the same curve. And I used steel as well, and it was the same type of curve. So, and the Neves, I think, are more third than they are second. In the low frequency range like that, either one sounds fatter. But the primary difference between the APIs and like with mine, and I believe the Neve was the same way, was that the distortion didn't go up with the level. The distortion kind of stayed where it was. So a snare drum would go through, be clean, and then would settle into a harmonic. Where with the API, when it went through the peak, there was distortion on the peak. So the API had a tendency to sound fatter in a different way than the Neve or the API, because everybody always said the Neves were always a little cleaner than the APIs, but they, with just regular music, they were pretty much the same, but it was the transients that the Neve popped through cleaner, the API was a little dirtier. But at the same time, that was the sound that you wanted. There were certain things that you wanted that sound on, certain things you wanted that sound on. Nowadays, of course, there's like 800 fucking million,
Yes.
500 modules, and you can pick any flavor you want, and people get too caught up in the flavors. But basically, you had the two directions. You had the API sound, you had the Neve sound. They both made great records. And then, when SSL came in, they didn't have the transformers. They were mostly they were trying to be more like clean. And they were, that was their whole thing. Colorless, yeah. And it was interesting because all the equipment we had in those days was this dark, heavy equipment, all the tube stuff, all the compressors, all that stuff. And it made these beautiful sounding records that were just thick with whipped cream, And when they went over to the digital recordings, the sound of the tape and stuff like that kind of went away and you had a cleaner sound. So now this warmth was even more important. But it was interesting when that happened, a lot of the earlier devices that were designed to be cleaner and more transparent became less popular because the recording medium was transparent. So the last thing you want to do is go through something transparent into something transparent. You wanted some dirt and to record that. So all those little things, they're all ebb and flow things with the industry, the direction of the way, sound goes and the way the process goes. But they all have a reason. I mean, it was like, when I bought the company, this is actually very cool. Datronics at the time, because they had a lot of really smart people there. They had a guy there who came to them who was involved in API in the last days, who was the guy who brokered them being the maker of the stuff, licensed maker of the stuff. He came to them and he had invented in his life Pong, the first video game, and the Speak and Spell. And he had this idea for payphones that when you call long distance on a payphone, it was always a fucking nightmare. So we came up with the credit card slot that you wipe a card through.
That was from Datronics?
That was from Datronics. And you wipe the card through it, and you had a bunch of buttons, and you could pick the long distance company, and you could pick the language. Now, the reason that all came about was that early on, when MCI was doing long distance, API or AT&T didn't like the fact that they had competition. So, and they owned all the copper. Anywhere you went, it was AT&T copper. So they had to lease those lines if they wanted to do long distance. And for some reason, MCI was charging about 20% less than AT&T, and it drove them fucking nuts. And so what it was is we actually made a test device for them called the Digitalker. That was this rack mount device that just talked. It would unhook, it would lift the phone up, which they call off hook.
Yeah.
It would talk, and then it would unhook, and it would set up this sequence. So it would simulate conversations. And they would analyze the conversations because they couldn't do it in real time because it's against the law. You need a wiretap, license for that.
Oh.
Yeah. So we made this test device for them because they were coming out with this, they were finalizing this product that would take the spaces between words and put them together and create new phone lines. And that's how they were beating AT&T at their own game, is they were using the space between words to create new phone lines, and then they were using those phone lines.
Cow.
So when AT&T, yeah, so these guys were smart. So when AT&T figured this out, they started introducing extra loops of wire into their lines that they were leasing, because with a telephone line, it's an unshielded balanced line. It has to be absolutely balanced, and it'll reject everything. The wires, the phone wires you see up there, there's 50 pair twisted together with one shield. And there's no crosstalk. But now when you start hearing other conversations, it's because either your line or their line has some little imbalance. The phone handset, all that coil and all that stuff in there, that was to make sure that it was balanced. And one of the reasons why they charged you for extra phones was because that had a certain load. And when you picked that phone up, it had a DC loop that went to the central office and a certain impedance that caused the relay to close, and then you could dial the phone. And if you added 2 phones, it was too low, and sometimes you couldn't. When you picked the phone up, it would never dial because it was a different impedance. So they had to come up and install a new phone and adjust it. It wasn't like a conspiracy, like you couldn't own a phone. It was because it had to, the way the circuit worked. Okay,
Wow.
That's why on the bottom of a phone it says ringer equivalent. That's what it was. Is the ringer equivalent. One was a phone. Most of those solid state ones were 0.1, so you could have 10 of them before it started affecting the lines. So. Now you take. You
didn't
see,
know that.
all this stuff was going on. So AT&T started doing this to MCI. They started introducing these lines, and that's when they first came up with their computerized switching. So because in the early days, phones were designed to have an address, and they were designed to stay at the house. You didn't take your phone number with you.
No.
It was programmed to your house in that location. So that's why you had the first 2 digits were like Windsor 77,
Yeah.
whatever. That was your area. Then it was in quadrants, and then it was in blocks, and then it was in streets, and then it was your house. That's what the phone number was.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was Hollywood here.
Yeah.
HO.
HO, and mine was WI.
Yeah.
So, and so that all started to move around. So they had to build switchers to allow them to do that, because they would have to literally take a wire from your house, run it on a pole, run it over to this way, run over that way to your new house, so you could have that same phone line. It was a nightmare. So and that's where these regulations came in. So MCI was beating the fuck out of these guys at their own thing. It was great, So they started introducing these lines, extra lines. They started doing it with the computer, and so all the MCI, all the long distance calls were really noisy and crappy, because they would unbalance the line, and then they would rebalance them, and then they would take the wire out, and it would unbalance the line again, and it would sound like crap. So MCI hired somebody to go to work at AT&T and found this out, and MCI sued them and for antitrust. And anytime you have an antitrust suit that's big, the government takes it over. And the government just says, you know what, you guys are too big.
Was that why they broke them up?
And that's what broke them up. Oh. So we were involved in that in the early days at Datronics. We made a device that actually would check the phone line, echo back, and this was before computers. This is like CPM was like early computer stuff. We made these boxes that would test the line, balance the line with inductors and capacitors, and by the time you got the phone up to your ear, it was dead quiet. And we were making these for MCI because they didn't know at the time that they were just being screwed. They just thought, well, this is the way it is. So when that all broke up, that's when all the long distance services started coming out, because at that point they had to say, competition can be anybody. So now you had all these long distance services, and a lot of them would just contract and buy bulk long distance from MCI and then call it their own.
Yeah.
So now you had to be able to access that stuff. So we made these phone things that had all the different phone long distance services and all the different languages. And we used a 312 mic pre, a 550A, and a 525 compressor when we actually made the data.
Really?
For the things.
So they were API-based
they all sounded
phone
great.
systems.
The voices on the phone sounded great. So we created the credit card slot, so you could put a credit card through and make a long distance call. The early version of that was the thing we called payphone, or it was called like coin pay or something, where it was the box. When you turn the key on the box, it would send the amount of money that it took into the central office, so they knew how much money was in the box, because the guys that would empty the phone boxes would typically pocket a third to half the money.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so now it was payphone. It was called payphone, and you turn it and it would tell them how much was in there. So that was the first. We did the credit card thing. So when that happened, okay, that became huge, because whoever had that had the long distance market in payphones. So New Jersey Bell or Bell Atlantic, one of those companies, wanted to buy that part of the company.
From Datronics.
From Datronics. They were going to sell the whole company to them. But because they had all the inventory of API, it was too much money. So they tried to sell API, and they found that API didn't really have any owners because the original owners had gone bankrupt, and they had been liquidated. So that's when Saul Walker said to me, give them a bid, walk away with it. Don't say a word. There's no patents or trademarks. So I did. And that's how I ended up with it.
That's how you got API.
What was the bid?
$300,000. And I got 2 tractor trailer loads full of shit. And then that's the dumpsters thing that you made a joke about. I got a call that there was a period of time when the people at Datronics were really scamming Atlantic Research. And what they had been doing is they were putting everybody's codes for their billing codes. They were charging it to overhead. And they were getting a lot of money. And they were just basically dividing it up themselves. And one of my friends was the guy who came up with it. They figured it out. And so they would all make us submit our timesheets in pencil, which is against the law.
Pencil.
So they could erase
Eraser.
the code and put the code they wanted in there. So he would make photocopies of all of his timesheets before he turned them in. And then he took all the timesheets after like about 4 months, sent them to Atlantic Research and said, compare these to what's on the record. And they went like, whatever, Bob, do this whenever you get a chance. And he'd come back and he'd say, you should see this.
Everyone's different.
Everyone was altered. And one day,
Oh, boy.
the whole place was wiped out. And the day before that, they laid us all off.
Pink slip, huh?
Yeah, pink slipped everybody. And the next day, they were all gone. And these new guys came in, and I got a phone call 3 days later that said, could you please come back in? And they put the original team all back together, and it was these new guys. They were awesome people. And that's when we really started doing the audio stuff.
Okay.
And that was the beginning of when we really started. We made consoles, we made all kinds of shit, and it was actually a lot of fun. And he's the guy who arranged to have me buy it because that's when they were all cashing out, you know. And I remember the day that he called me up, and he goes, guess what today is? And then I get this email, and there's a picture of him holding these 2 equalizers. He says, these are the last 2.
The last
He finally had sold through all those fucking equalizers.
Well, I'll tell you, though, I remember we had a bunch of stock that was here. And mostly EQs. I mean, like boxes.
And that was when the rumors now were out, and everybody hated the 558X1.
We had hundreds of them. And I'd had an agreement in the contract that I could give them notice and say, we no longer want to be a dealer, and we're returning unsold stock, because this is about the time the company is just unraveling.
Yeah, that was.
So I gave them that notice, and I said, I want to send this stuff back to you. And they said, okay, well, we're terminating your contract, but just keep it.
Right.
Yeah, it was don't send it back.
That was right when it all fell apart.
That's all fell apart. So I ended up getting like at least 50 or 100 EQs free.
Did you sell them, obviously?
Yeah, we sold them. Yeah.
But I remember, and then that was the other thing when that AMEC console finally went out the door. You had a picture of you on the truck. You were like, and that caption was, the agony has ended.
Yes. Yeah.
I was at Wally Hyder's a year ago, or it's called Hyde Street Studios in San Francisco now, and they were the ones that got that AMEC board.
They bought the AMEC. Lucky them.
Let's rewind real quick. Paul, I have one quick question.
Yeah.
So in the 1960s, pretty much, and you could verify this, you didn't have factory-built consoles. It was all kind of custom. EMI, Capitol, Sunset Sound. You were building your consoles.
You had a choice
in the
of
60s.
broadcast concert or build
your own.
Why do you remember why your father, Salvatore Tutti Camerata, liked API?
That's a good question.
They were the only ones that made the cards. It wasn't a matter. They were the only. They made the 300 cards, the 325, which was
you didn't have an booster.
Option. They had a mic pre card. They had a phono preamp card. They had that was if you wanted to build a console and you didn't want to get into the component level of building a console, you bought cards.
Gotcha.
And you put them together.
Well, it's we only had 2 consoles here up until the time we bought an API-based console. One was the Alan Emick, the custom Langevin tube console, the Studio One that all Doors records, all those things were done on. And then the second console was the Sound Techniques, which was the first console,
store-bought console, kind of, right?
First store-bought console to the United States out of England
that was an actual console.
It was an actual
from
console,
concept.
and this
Yeah.
is long before Neve was in business. This is long before Trident was in business, and we got the first English console in the United States.
That's verified too. We did a big podcast with Danny White of Sound Techniques and talked about the whole history of Sound Techniques. But Sunset Sound, your father went to England to
Yeah.
get that console.
Yep.
And brought the Sound Techniques board, and then
Met Jeff Frost. Yeah.
Elektra Records bought the second one on a
Yeah.
recommendation of 2D.
We brokered that to them,
yes.
to Elektra.
And it was sad because those, most of those guys were guys like, like your dad who wanted to build consoles, wanted to have a thing, and Eric and people like that who wanted to build the consoles, and like the Bushnell team or the Domidio team and stuff like that.
Right.
And those guys, they weren't necessarily businessmen, so they basically, everybody in those days just fucked themselves into a corner when it came to business, and so that's why a lot of those companies didn't last as long as they could have. Because they weren't like IBM when they formed. They had a lawyer, an engineer, and a bookkeeper. You know, these guys weren't like that. They were guitar players, bass players, and drummers.
Let's touch down on Bob Bushnell because you both have an amazing relationship with the Studio One console.
Right.
From 1970 to 1984, we had a Bushnell-built console with API
so
components.
we had a Bob Bushnell console that after the Tube Langevin came out of Studio One. My father had contracted Bob Bushnell to build an API-based console for Studio One. And on that team, I know Dean Jensen worked for him. He was one of the guys, but several others. So we got the Bushnell console. I don't know how many they had built prior, not many, one or two. Anyway, we got it in 19. I think we
and they were
installed
all different too. They were all built.
They were all different.
How do you want this?
How do you want to build this? How many channels? Do you want a monitor section? Do you not? They built some ARM service boards, radio kind of boards. Anyway, so we installed that in 1970, and that remained in the room until about 1984 when we put in the Sunset Industries custom-built console that's in there now.
So 14 years, though. We're talking Doors LA Woman was mixed on it. I verified that. You're talking Van Halen 1. Van Halen 1 was done on that Bushnell board.
Yeah.
Linda Ronstadt. The Rolling Stones.
Rolling Stone, Exile on Main Street overdubs. Yeah.
Exile.
Chris Zeppelin was in two.
The Doobie
What is
Brothers.
that?
That would have been the
It was
Sound
on
Techniques
there.
console.
Doobie Brothers.
Doobie Brothers.
Yeah, a lot of the Doobie Brothers records.
That was pretty much an LA sound. Was that?
That's exactly how you described it yesterday to me.
Well, you had the New York sound, which was mostly 560s, and then you had the LA sound that was 558s.
cool.
That's kind of the way they were.
So that board is tremendous. It lasts 14 years in that room. You decide that it's time to move it along and get something different going.
I decided that we're getting ready to put in the board, and we're like, what are we going to do with the board? And I go, well, we need to sell the board, I guess.
And not to somebody here in Hollywood.
No, my
Genius.
edict was, no, we need to move this thing out of town, far out of town.
So it doesn't compete.
I don't need to see my console down the street and them going, why do you need to go to Sunset Sound when you can come to us?
Or like T-Bone was one of your top guys, like Joe is.
Well, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, and then if he ended up with that console, you'd lose him in a second. You'd never
Gee,
see
did
him.
that happen?
Yeah. 27 years later, maybe.
Exactly.
So
So we're getting to that. This is a
We'll
great
get- yeah.
This is a ring around the rosy. It's hilarious.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
But who does that board go to then? The Bushnell board.
So that board goes to Mr. Paul Wolff here.
Yes.
Ta-da.
Incredible.
Yeah, which I have that picture of us.
Oh, it's going up.
Yeah,
Our matching tan khakis.
Yes.
With the
Wild and
manual
crazy
that
guys.
everybody claims never existed.
Oh, it existed.
I had it in my hand.
Yeah, it existed.
So you called me up and you said, we need to get rid of this console, and I can't sell it in town for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And do you know anybody that would want it? I said, well, let me just check around, And he wanted to go. I was in Virginia, so he wanted to go past New York. He didn't even want it in New York. He wanted it in
Nova Scotia.
North Carolina, or somewhere on an island that's out there. The Bermuda
Or maybe in
Triangle.
the Atlantic.
Right, and if you were a little less conscious of money, you probably would have just thrown the fucking thing away.
Probably.
Which a lot of people did.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was so I talked to the guys because I was working at a studio at the time too, at the same time. And I said, you guys want to do this? So we had an APSI console and it was dying, and I had modified the fuck out of it and it was still dying. And so we thought, what the hell? And so I said, well, how much do you want for it? And he didn't want a lot for it. He just wanted it gone.
Gone. Out
like
of town.
How gone?
Out of Dodge.
You make it disappear.
So we put it in the fourth floor of a studio. I remember hoisting it through the window of the studio. And I remember the first time I used it, I cut a record on it and then came out here and mixed the record in Studio One.
Oh, that's right.
The day before Yes was going to do their 9
zillion years in Studio One with
And Yes.
big generator. Yeah, well, they were in there for about 9 months.
No, that was the 90210 record.
No, it was big generator. It
Was
was
it?
after 90210.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was.
That's the wrong
It was
number,
the
but that's
follow-up. It was the follow-up record.
Yeah, and that was it had all the racks of equipment in there.
Yeah.
Like 2 or 3
Paul
days.
de Villiers
and he
was the producer.
He said,
Yeah.
just come and use the studio, and just whatever. So we mixed the record that we cut on the Studio One console and mixed it on that, which I don't think anybody else was able to ever do unless there was that overlap. I think I'm the only guy who
I think you're it.
cut the record on
Cut
it.
the record on that board and then
Mixed it
waited and came back. Well, we didn't wait because you had the board.
We had the board. I cut it
Right.
in my studio and then came out and mixed it on that. And I'll tell you what, that is one of the absolute fattest fucking records I ever made in my life. I still listen to it today, and I just love the way everything sounds.
What is it?
It's a band called Push, and it was a local band that were just really great guys. And I remember David Glover was our assistant.
Glove Daddy.
Yeah. He was a great guy. He did anything we wanted. He was just so helpful, And, I mean...
He was getting ready to go on the 9-month Yes project.
Right.
You should have seen him after that.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure he was like Mr. Seedy. Yeah. But I mean, we cut it on the record. And the thing about that console, and this is the way it was with a lot of those old consoles, and also it had to do with the way you cut records. You cut records for keeps. You EQ'd them before you put them down. There were a lot of things you did. So when you played it back, you could put all the faders at 0 and pretty much have a good starting point. And you pretty much could do that. You put all the faders at 0, throw a little reverb on the drums, separate the overheads left and right, and you just hit record and you had a record. I mean, that's how simple it was,
Yeah.
And so we basically tracked that record on that console, and then I came out and mixed it on this one, and it just made you happy when you listened to it. It was just so nice, just the tone of everything and the way it all fit together, and we used the freezer, the locker,
the chamber?
the chamber, yeah, the chamber that had the dead rat that went to the doors. That chamber that was on a previous. You got to look it up. Look at the previous one, the interview with Jim Messina, and you'll understand the rat.
Yeah.
But yeah, we used that and the plates and everything, and an echo and all the tape echo and stuff. It was just, God, it was just such a great sound. But it is. I realize that I think I'm probably the only guy that ever was able to do that because
it's extremely
I had
cool.
it. And I knew full well that you didn't want to lose the console, so that stayed there for about 7 years, and then I sold it to Tom Silverman in New York, Tommy Boy Records.
Oh, that's right.
Remember that band, The Safety Dance, and all that stuff. He bought it and put it in his studio.
I think I forgot about that. Now I recall that.
It wasn't Michael Block.
But it did get to Michael Block.
It ended when he sold it. Then Michael Block bought it, put it in storage, and then put it in his own studio in Philadelphia. And Shelley Yakis used to work there.
Oh,
and
wow.
I remember taking some of my tapes up there and playing them. And Shelley said to me, "This is this is a guy I love Shelley." More than any, I mean, he's just the greatest guy on the face of the earth. I love this guy, and he's a mentor too. It's like when you're friends with somebody that you just go like, I can't believe I'm sitting in the room eating lunch with somebody who likes me, and he's the best guy I've ever, I mean, he's just an awesome guy. So I play this thing and I play this bass, and he stops the tape and he goes, my God, he says, the next time I record bass, I'm calling you. And I thought to myself, God, what a compliment, And it was because it was tracked on the API, and then we mixed it on the same console. And when we played it back, it just sounded like it was
really
gold.
Good, huh?
So it stayed there for a long time, and then it went into storage, and then he put it on eBay, and guess who bought it?
Yeah, so that's a that was so. T-Bone Burnett's,
But it was 27 years later, though.
I know, but
still,
you know, he's a resident client here for
3 decades, right?
For, I don't know,
10 decades in a row.
No,
Yeah,
for 3 decades
forever,
we saw that
years.
he worked here for
I mean,
30
he's
years.
doing, where Oh Brother Where Art Thou. He's doing, all kinds of incredible records here. And he's all giddy one day, and he comes up to me and goes, Paul, I want to talk to you. And I'm like, oh, okay, I wonder what T-Bone wants. He goes, you're not going to believe this. And I go, what? Believe what? And he's like, I'm going to buy your old console. And I'm like, it didn't click at first. I'm like,
the AMAC?
What? Well, yeah, like, what console? I mean, this is literally
It was 24 years.
20-something years
24, 27 years later.
And,
Yeah.
and I'm like, what console? Yeah, 25, 27. I don't know. He goes, the Studio One console. I go, the Studio One console back east?
Get Paul Wolff on the phone.
Like,
You son of a bitch.
I mean, the minute he said that, I was just like, there goes our client. So that's what happened.
Yeah, he had it for quite a few years. And
Put in
then
his house?
Put it in the
Yeah.
Brentwood house,
Yeah.
and with our ex-engineer Mike Persante, and they did some incredible records on it, like Raising Sand with Alison Krauss and Robert Plant. I mean,
Great records.
tons of records on it.
Now, the funny thing about that is when he decided to sell it, he put it on Reverb.
Yeah, I helped him out on that. I did an interview. He did an interview, and I did an interview.
It's on our YouTube.
And,
Yeah.
on YouTube. And
Well, there's an interesting thing about Reverb versus eBay. And I haven't been able to confirm this, but I believe eBay had some patents on the way their auction works. So if you sell something, you do a starting bid at 50, you bid $50. I bid 100, it only goes up 7% or something. So it goes to like 54 or something like that. And then if you put on a bid for 58, then I have 100, so it does your bid, and then it increments back up, and now I'm still the highest bidder. But when it sells at whatever that point is. And I believe with Reverb, whatever money you put down, when it sells, if that's the highest bid, you pay that amount. So
well, also their commission structure, I was told from the person who listed it for T-Bone, that on Reverb has a cap on commission. eBay doesn't.
right.
So if it sells for $500,000, you pay that percentage on $500,000. Reverb doesn't do that. They have
Right.
a high-end cap. I don't know what it is.
But
maybe
they're-
50 grand or whatever it is.
Their auction process, I don't believe, is incremental.
Yeah.
I believe if you put down, like a lot of times, if you want to buy a piece of equipment on eBay and you say, look, I'll pay $250 for this thing.
Yeah.
So you just put a bid on $250, even though it comes up at $1. So whatever it sells for, if it's under that, you win. If it goes up to $250 and someone bids above you, you don't win. And you say, well, I would only pay $250 for it anyway.
Right.
So this guy decides that he's going to go on vacation or something. So he puts down probably a joke, 500 grand as a joke.
Oh, wow.
He goes on vacation, comes back. Guess what? You won the auction. Oh, great. 500
Yeah.
grand. I'm sure T-Bone probably shit himself.
Well, I forget his name, but
It was
he's
640, wasn't it?
It's something just
yeah. It's
And
the guy,
15 minutes.
He was buying. I wish I could remember his name. He's building a really intense complex in upstate New York, and he made all his money in medical, I believe.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he bought 5 sound techniques. Sunset Sound Edition EQs. I mean,
Oh, wow.
this guy was buying everything. So for him, I don't think it was
Yeah.
a huge expense.
That's
Yeah.
incredible.
But T-Bone came out on top.
Oh, yeah, he definitely came out on top of that. I mean, talk about an investment.
I mean, for holding that and making incredible records for 27 years and then selling it for 10 times what he paid for it.
for making all the records that he made on it.
Oh, no kidding.
And then all the records he couldn't make on it, and then owning it and making all the records he put on it, and then selling it. He's definitely got his money out of that console. He's
he's
You
That's
know, we
hilarious.
need to clarify something. We investigate Van Halen religiously, but Van Halen 1 was done on that board, which was a Bushnell.
yep.
No other Van Halen was done on a Bushnell. Everyone thinks that there was a Bushnell in Studio 2 here at Sunset Sound. That is not true.
It's not
Every
a Bushnell.
publication writes that. What records or what console was done in Studio 2, and what did Van Halen do? Van Halen 2, Women and Children, Fair Warning, Diver Down. That would have been...
So that was a custom API console. So after the success of the Studio One console, the Bushnell console, the Sound Techniques, I think, was having some issues of part problems. That's what I remember. We had the talk, I think I remember, was that they couldn't get certain parts. It was because it had to come from England, and consoles need maintenance. So my father...
In those days, you didn't have FedEx.
No, yeah, exactly. It was a boat.
U.S. mail.
Yeah, not even necessarily a plane. So my father made the decision, let's get another API-based console, but a custom console. So Bushnell, I believe, was out of business by then. So I think he hired, this is where it's a little murky, but I think he hired some of the people from Bushnell. I think Dean Jensen was one of them, and there were a couple other guys. And anyway, we ended up building the console across the street at Crossroads of the World. And so it started out as being built by someone else, which I can't remember, but then we took it over. And so it was basically a Sunset Sound built console that we hired people to build.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And it was very similar to the Studio One console and the Studio 3 console.
And then you had the Studio One console, you expanded it, and that's when Dimidio...
That's when Dimidio came in. That was originally a 24-channel board, and that was just too small at the time, or it became too small. So we needed to expand it to 32 tracks, which Frank did that. And I think that was our first association with Frank. And then when we built Studio 3, we went back to Frank, and we said, we want you to build a console for us, because we were happy with his work.
And he could, and he was actually finishing things.
Yes, very admirable guy.
No, I really liked Frank a lot.
Yes.
He used to buy a lot of EQs from me.
We want him to come in. Brian Key, who's been trying to get me to get a hold of him. I think his granddaughter emails us sometimes.
Yeah, you might have to go out there, but I would definitely do that.
Yeah, he's got to be in his 90s now.
He is one of those guys that you want to get on tape, because I mean that was the problem with Les Paul. He would tell great stories when you were one-on-one with him. And I went up to visit him at his house, and the things that he said were just unbelievable. If you put a camera on him, he would soften him a lot, because he didn't want to offend anybody.
Sure.
Yeah. But he was an unfiltered guy and one-to-one, and I just loved him. And Frank is the same way. And Frank is, I think Frank's from the East Coast.
He's from Cuba. He's a Cuban.
Cuban, right? Because he has this kind of like what a bunch of fucking dumbasses, But just a knowledgeable guy, great guy, knew how to do everything, and big, huge Formica panels, engraved Formica panels, and
that's right,
stuff like that. And yeah, he was good. He built a console for Prince.
Whoa, Dimidio?
Yeah.
Oh, because he wanted to mimic.
When he
yeah.
mimicked Studio 3.
Right, but the funny thing is that, and anybody who ever worked with those guys, Prince was just a pain in the fucking ass. I mean, he's, however nice he was, great songs and stuff like that, but he could be a real
perfectionist,
pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Well, perfectionist is except that he fucked himself many times, being so perfectionist that he would forget elements. So it got to the point where Frank said, all right, look, you tell me exactly what you want, and that's exactly what I'm going to build, period. Mm-hmm. And they went, okay, fine. And they listed everything. So the console shows up, and they're put tracks up on it and stuff like that, and they're running, and it might have even been Susan, might have been the one.
Susan Rogers.
Yeah, that discovered the fact that it had no solo bus because he didn't ask for one.
Oh, God.
And it was like, you said
that's cool.
to do exactly what I tell you to do.
Yeah, no recommendations.
That's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
And so they had to go put a solo bus in. And that was kind of one of those kind of things. And that's the way Frank was. It's like, you want to be a dick? Okay. You tell me what you want, and that's exactly what I'm going to do.
You got it.
Wow.
And you get a console without a frame because he didn't ask for a frame.
But he was Studio B at Paisley Park is a replica of Studio 3 here at Sunset Sound.
Ish. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they hired some of the same people. They remember
Yeah.
they were measuring the room and the height.
Peggy
all
was
this
involved in
stuff.
that too.
Yeah.
Do you think it could be the songs that did well? I mean,
Yeah, I mean-
I'm just saying, I'm throwing that out. You know,
Yeah.
I mean that's as a plus for us, it's a great thing that there is that witchcraft that goes along with it, because then you can always say, oh yeah, yeah. And Brent Averill tried to destroy everybody because it was like, oh yeah, the op amps are different. Don't use those op amps, and it turned out to be the transformers that were really different, because API had like 7 different op amps. It was a good op amp, and there were many versions of it, but it was just a good op amp. That's it.
Yeah.
But the transformer changed dramatically, and that's what made the difference in the sound in those days. And that's why you guys put that little snuffer circuit on the output of the transformers to kind of calm down that ring that it had. And we discovered that when I owned API. We discovered that, and we turned that into, we figured out what it was and then corrected it, and basically in like 96 got back the original sound back in the transformers.
Right.
It took me 10 years to figure out what it was, because it was never written down anywhere. It was one of those kind of things where you order something from a company, you say, we want this many windings on this type of core, we want these colors coming out, and we want the holes to mount it in this position, and blah, blah, blah. And they do. You don't specify how you want, you tell them how you want the windings done, but they're going to wind it themselves. And they used a certain type of wire that they always used that was never in a spec. And so when we went back to have the transformers made, they made them with what they had now instead of what they had then, because it was never specified. Again, we'll make it exactly the way you say it. And so that's what it was. And they had made, the transformers were slightly different in the way they were wound. So we finally figured out a way to simulate the way it used to be, because that old technology was no longer available. So we had to figure out a new way to do it, and we did. And that's how they're made now, and that's one of the reasons why there's people that offer transformers with the Litz windings or not the Litz windings, because the Litz winding thing is why it works. Litz wire is why the wire is twisted in your extension cord, is because it allows the cable to have some bendability and strength and stuff like that. We found that insulated Litz wire works really well to make transformers, and so there's a lot of people that are doing that now because they all kind of discovered it. But there was a big thing in the 80s, in the late 70s actually, there was a big thing where a lot of the audio transformers in the world changed because these companies that made this certain type of wire just kind of went away, because when solid state came out, the transformers and the tubes and stuff kind of faded for a while until they came back. But at that point, a lot of those companies went bust because they weren't making the quantities.
Let's move into our third act. Paul Wolff, you build up API, sell it off. You build up ToneLux, sell it off. Your new company, Fix Audio Designs, and Sunset Sound owner Paul Camerata have collaborated on a preamp,
Yeah.
and have been for some time now. But
Yeah, it's 10 years actually.
Tell
Because
us-
we're coming on the 60th anniversary. We originally
That's
released
right.
it as the
The
50th,
50th
anniversary.
anniversary.
Well, because of the popularity of the 500 module series, thank you very much. They wanted to do a 500 module. He had a guy that gave him some initial drawings, and there were some, what I considered to be issues with it. And I said, well, why don't you just let me do it? So he says, all right, do it. And we went around and around with the panel, and we came up with, there was a new process that was being done. It was printing on metal, color printing on metal.
But you, Paul Camerata, were getting a lot of interest for people asking about a preamp.
Oh,
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
you wanted the Studio One preamp.
Everybody that came in here, for decades, since probably the 80s, they were like, oh, this mic pre, I love this mic pre. I want to buy one. I'm
Yeah.
like, well, we don't sell them. They're in our consoles. And they're like, well, can't you build us some, don't you have any parts? Can't you just build us some? And I go, well, what do we put them in? They're not built for a rack. They're on a, an
Plus or
external
minus 24 volts.
Yeah, they're on
yeah.
an external power supply, and I must have had I don't know how many requests. So lo and behold, fast forward, that's when we collaborated, and I said, it's time to repackage the design in the exact same original design with the exact same original transformer.
Notice his eyes and the way
Yeah.
he's saying that.
Yeah,
Am
But-
I clear at
Yeah.
what I am
But
saying?
it has to be original, otherwise I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
But we were fortunate. We were fortunate to be able to do it. We ended up using the same 990s, like the Studio One console, and we got Cinemag, which was Rickenbacker.
Rickenbacker, I think, is a basketball
That's a guitar.
team. Yeah, a
isn't it?
guitar. Rickenbacker's a guitar. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, Reichenbach. So
Rickenbacker.
we got Reichenbach to. They had the file. They had the Sunset Sound file.
Yeah, we went and contacted them.
And they pulled it out, and they said, "Oh yeah, we see what we did here. We'll build you some transformers."
And by that time, it was now called Cinemag. 'Cause
Cinemag.
Tom Reichenbach had taken it over, and he had David Gearin with him. And then, really shockingly and unfortunately, Tom passed away. He was on getting a heart operation, and it just stopped. It was a shock to the whole industry that in manufacturing, But David has done just a amazingly good job, and he went back and found it, because I know that Jensen had no record of whatever it was.
We were buying them then. I mean, back in the day, we didn't buy them from Reichenbach.
No, because they made them for Jensen.
Yeah, they made them for Jensen. They were a subcontractor.
Yeah.
So we bought them through Jensen, but Jensen doesn't associate with Reichenbach anymore that I'm aware of.
No, because they make their own, and they're
They make
different.
their own windings, their own transformers.
And
So we
they do
didn't go to
differently,
them.
yeah.
So we went to Cinemag, which was the proper way to go.
Right, and David pulled up. There were two versions of the original drawing. There was one that was done with a real thin rice paper, and then there was one that was done with a regular type of paper, And so he wound a couple of both.
Yeah, we got a few testers.
We got a few testers, and Joe
Ciccarelli helped us out
guy.
immensely.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And
well,
Joe,
we used his magic ears to
goal. Yeah,
make
goal.
sure.
And his, Joe's goal was to be able to use an old one on an overhead and a new one on an overhead, and you couldn't tell the difference. I mean, that's the extent that we went with this.
Yeah.
Because everybody says, "Oh, it's just like it used to be." And one of the problems with that, like the Pultex, and this is what I told Steve Jackson early on. I said, when you do this, get ahead of this because it's going to kill you. Is that when these people come out with these Pultex, they try to make them sound like the ones that are out now. And the ones that are out now are 50 years old.
Yeah.
So when he was coming out with his, they were going to be like they were when they were new. And they're not going to sound like the ones they have now. And I told him to get in front of that, because if you advertise that as a feature, people think it's cool. If you don't, they're going to say, "Oh, they don't sound like the old ones." And you get all these idiots that just destroy you, And that's what happens. It's a rumor-based industry. So that's, So we wanted to make sure that when we did this, somebody didn't go like, they're... And I don't think to this day there has been one negative comment about them not sounding like the way they originally did.
Yeah, they're about as true to the original as they possibly could be.
Yeah, and anytime there's a component that gets discontinued or something like that, we go into like this shit panic mode to see what we can do to find the original one. And that just happened. The pots became like exorbitant. So I incorporated the pots that I use with my fixed consoles, and I figured out a way to make them do exactly what they did before. And we did change the original mute circuit, because one of the things that we did is when you pop in 48 volts or you pop in line, there's always a big thump. And if you have it turned up loud, it can blow your speakers. So I have a circuit in there, when you hit 48 volts, it immediately mutes the mic pre and then comes back up again. And we were using an LDR. And we did find that the differences in the LDRs could change the way the mics sound.
The LDRs...
they're illegal.
Oh, yeah, that's right, the Rojas thing, isn't it? Yeah. But over time, they kind of fail. Because they're
fade.
A switch. They're like a... Right?
It's a cadmium cell with an LED over it, and the cadmium deteriorates after a while, and they start becoming less of what they are. It's kind of like us as we get older, But
Speak for yourself.
So I took that out and I replaced it with a FET, and now the FET actually turns off it turns off with the rail voltage. So you have to hit a peak of greater than minus 15 volts, which is literally impossible to turn that FET on to interfere. We did that, and we tuned a few things up, but we did find this process of printing, and we decided to put a sunset on the front panel, and it's a color sunset. And I now have one of these printing machines. I can do this. I can print on metal. I do that now. I print my modules.
You sent me home with the panel from when I was in Nashville last week, or last month, I guess.
So that's that's what makes it kind of unique. And we made an extra thick panel, which is cool. And then the knobs recessed into it, a lot like the fixed consoles are recessed into the panel. It looks really nice, you know.
And in a few weeks, probably when this airs, we'll have almost 50 of them that we'll have available for sale, right?
Mark the beginning of that statement so they can be edited out.
What's that?
I'm committing to whatever I can ship you. The problem we've had is that everybody has been like doing anything they can. I feel like a drug dealer buying parts these days. I mean, I'm literally buying 150 of these, and you know, I typically buy reels of 5,000 of resistors and spools of 5,000 capacitors and stuff like that, and I've had to scab buy shit, you know, because the delivery chains in this country are
the disruption out of China too, right?
Yeah, well, it wasn't as much of them. It was the guys in L.A. that seemed like they decided they were going to play a little game with everybody and slow things down, and it backed up so quickly that they're just now digging out of it. And then you had COVID. So, you know, that sort of thing. So we get, you know, the transformers we get delivered in quantities that, you know, we're getting a new batch on the 3rd or 4th of May, and we're going to build the next run of them. And we'll have more than we did the last time. So, yeah, that's what we're looking for. So, yeah, my goal is to give you as many as we can, you know, because that's what we want to do.
Yeah, we had 10, and then they went in one day.
Yeah, right, I know. And then you had another 10, and they went in one day.
To learn more about those, you can go to sunsetsoundstore.com. What's the name of your website for Fix Audio if people want to learn more or get in touch with you?
Fix Audio Designs with an S, fixaudiodesigns.com. And we're the only person in the world, the only company in the world that makes an immersive analog console that does full-on Dolby 714 mixes. And no matter what anybody tells you about the Dolby format, all the film people, all Apple, all the people, all they want is a 714. They don't want 1114. They don't want 916. They reduce it down to 714. That's what they want. They're happy with that. Film, they can do as many as they want, but just stop.
Yeah.
Okay?
Just stop.
Just stop it. I've got 3 of those consoles, and they're actually pretty cool. I mean, when you mix in a discrete bed instead of using objects, it just, when you do the binaural thing, it just sounds huge. It's amazing how good it sounds. You know, in analog consoles, there's always been this, you know, discussion of, you know, what, you know, do it in the box, out of the box, and stuff like this. This particular experience with an analog immersive console is amazing how good it sounds. You know, wow. And it's you know, immersive is going to make it because of the binaural aspect of it, that you don't have to have a big speaker system. I have one of those Sennheiser sound bars, and we were watching the Money Heist, and there was a scene where they had noise coming from above them on the 2nd floor behind them.
Wow! And
we were sitting there watching, and I asked my wife if she had the dishwasher on, and this was all coming from a sound bar in front of me. It actually had sound coming from behind me.
Wow.
So they've got that dialed in.
That's
so
incredible.
It's not going to be like 5.1 where you had to put speakers all over the place. And if it wasn't for Bose, there probably wouldn't be strong, because Bose came up with those little teeny speakers that your wives would allow the husbands to put up.
Yeah, you can put those up.
You can put those up. Just make sure they're white, you know. I mean, so yeah, it's a cool format. It's definitely something that's not, you know, it's not going to disappear like all the other stuff. It's actually, you know, you've got the Dolby Atmos format, you got the Sony 360 format, you've got the RO3D format. Those are all viable formats that sound nice. And for music, those types of things have an ambience to them that's actually very nice. There's not a lot of psychedelia going on in the upper speakers. It's just mainly ambience. But it does give you a really interesting experience.
Wow.
You know.
Did you design producer Greg Wells a console?
Yeah, Greg bought an immersive console.
Nice.
We started out with that right at the beginning of COVID.
Oh, wow.
So his studio was basically shut down. My delivery chain was shut down. So we both kind of like had this like ebb and flow that was synchronized. So when his studio was kind of ready to have the console put in, I was ready to ship the console. It just dragged on, but it'd be like, how you doing? Oh, we're still closed. You know, how you doing? We're still closed. You know, we just went up and down, but it all synchronized, and I was there the last couple of days, and you know, I mean, he's just a really nice guy. I mean, just a phenomenal guy.
He said he'd
And
come on the show. We'll have
he
to get
would
that going. Oh,
he
yeah,
would,
talk
and
to him
he
about
would
it.
do that in a minute. He's got some great stories too, and the history. I mean, the guy can play every instrument on the face of the earth.
Yep.
You know, but he's just a really nice guy, and the studio is great. It's just a great studio. You know, it's cool.
That's awesome.
So yeah, he's got great kids. His kids are like all entertainers. His wife is a sweetheart, and you know he's got one daughter that is just the most amazingly. It's like, how old are you? You know, she's just so electric. You know, it's just great. It's nice when your kids are raised around music, around the creation of music. They become creative. My daughter is very creative. My older daughter is very creative. Our son is very creative. You know, my brother and I both are very creative. My parents, because they were both in big bands, they knew about your dad.
Yeah.
My mom was in the only all-girl band. They toured around with the USO and CBS during World War II. My dad was in a big band that toured around. He told me stories of, like one story where they remember the old thing about the guy with the trench coat was always the drug dealers. He said that's because they were. They'd go into a club. And if you saw a guy with a trench coat on, you knew that guy had the drugs. And on one side he had drugs, and which most of them were legal. And the other side he had like 8mm porn and stuff like that. It was just like unbelievable. But he said
one-stop shopping.
Yeah, and the guys in the band that smoked pot would actually take a thumbnail and put the pot outside the window of their hotel because the maids would steal it.
The maids would take it.
Yeah, and so but he told me that these guys did, and he said like Glenn Miller. He said Glenn Miller, what created the Glenn Miller sound was their apparently their lead trumpet player was an alcoholic or something. I'll probably get sued for saying this, but it was like like he fell down a stairs and busted his mouth up, and so that night the clarinet player had to play all of the trumpet lead parts, and it created this sound that was unique.
Oh, so that's stuck.
It stuck, and it kind of became his signature sound, And so the same thing happens nowadays that happened back then.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, those are the kind of things. But the stories that they told, and when I told them when I was really young, and I said I'm going to go out on the road with a band, most of your parents would go out.
Ouch.
My mom and dad both said, "Oh, you're going to have a great time. You're going to love it."
That's cool.
Yeah, it was great. It was a lot of fun. But I went to bed every night with my dad playing saxophone, and
Did you grow up in Wisconsin or Michigan?
Michigan,
That's
yeah.
right.
So
we're gonna be moving there too soon.
Here we go.
Anita.
It was just a great upbringing. I loved my parents. My dad used to race cars, so I was like the youngest. I was actually in his pit crew. I've got pictures of me sitting in the early Formula One car, sitting in the driver's seat of it, and you can see this look on my face like
gearhead.
Yeah. And I used to fix all the SU carburetors. SU carburetors had this long needle valve.
Oh yeah,
And-
like in Mini Coopers.
Yeah, in a Mini Cooper. So
Oh,
they
the
would
BMC cars.
they would take
Yeah.
they would take the oil out of them. They put brake fluid in them because brake fluid was really thin, and so they'd pop open real quick. So when they punch it, they get this boost of gas, And taking it apart, a lot of times they'd bend that needle valve, and that needle valve had to be dead center or it wouldn't work. So I was the guy at the pit crew. These guys would come over and say, "Can you straighten this out?" And I'd sit there, and I was like 11, and I'd sit there and I'd
Oh yeah.
and straighten it out and give it back to him. And it was like, and I ended up getting a certification card from the SCCA. I was the youngest licensed SCCA timer. So I'd go to racing events with my dad, and I'd walk up to they had a big area that had the timers in it, and everybody had a clipboard and a stopwatch, and you'd do the lap, and then when the guy would go by, you'd write it down, and then you'd pick up a phone and you'd call their pit crew and you'd say, 2 minutes and 43 seconds, and then you'd hang up, and they would show it on a blackboard. They would hold the blackboard out that would say 2:37.
Let him know how he's doing.
Let him know how he's doing.
Right.
I saw Days of Thunder
Because there was no radios back then.
Yeah, and my dad actually used to race, and his last race was in a Porsche. For a racing team that his first big race, he had worked his way up to this, was for the Can-Am, the IMSA series, and it was the Canadian American race, and he went up there, and it was a big deal. It was huge. And he was like racing, and he was like the last guy in the pole position because he was the youngest, the newest racer, and he was racing this guy's car, and he was working his way up, and he was like third place, second place, and then he would come in. And it was an 8-hour race, so they'd alternate. And his partner who owned the car wouldn't like push it as hard, and he would fall back to like 15th place. And then my dad would go in and he'd go forward and he'd get back up to like second or third place. And the guy kept on putting the blackboard, rev it down, rev it down, rev it down. And finally, my dad he pulls into the pit crew, throws the keys in the guy's face and says, "Go fuck yourself." And that's the last time he ever raced. He would have won that race.
Really?
And it would have been his dream.
Oh.
Yeah, and this guy just robbed it because he was too chicken to push his own car.
Have you guys ever drove together? Paul used to race cars.
Paul had a 914-6 that when I first met
Don't you
him,
still have
Which
it?
I still have.
he
Yeah.
still has, but when I first
drove it last
met
year.
him, probably for the first time, because when
I've
I
only
first
seen
met
it
him,
once.
he had just bought it and he gave it to this guy to rebuild, and I
It was
think it was
1983.
1983, and then it was like, what, 5 years ago you say, "Hey, I got my car back."
That's correct.
Damn.
32 years to get the car.
Right.
fin-
And then you said
finished.
to me, "Yeah, I'm not sure I really like the way it runs, so I'm going to give it back to him." I go, "Are you nuts?" I said, "If you do that, put me in your will.
Yeah.
I want that
It
car."
wasn't back. It was there. For
Where'd
a
you
little
get
bit.
it from?
I bought it, I bought it in 1983. It was 13 years old then. I had owned a couple of ones before that, but
okay.
I wanted to do a ground-up restoration on the car. And unfortunately, ground-up restorations can get, mired in,
Time.
time and... I
Time
mean,
and-
it's not so much the money. It's just like, getting a person motivated to finish it. So my buddy mechanic, it sat in his shop for like 30 years.
It had to be rebuilt again.
It had to be repainted 3 times while it was there because it got dinged up or cracked or whatever.
And I had a 6, and I had probably 22 different Porsches throughout my life. And
Wow.
I had a 6 that actually had the 6 was taken out of it and had a blueprinted 4 in it, but it was still crazy.
What was so cool about this car is that
the ignition
the injection.
So
So, most of these 914.6s, well, not most, all of them were carbureted. They had Weber carbs, which is what I had. But the trick motor to have was a mechanical injected Bosch pump motor. And those came in like the 911E and S, and especially the Carrera 2.7 RS that wasn't sold in this country. And that was a 73 model. And it's an extremely coveted car now. I mean, they go for millions of dollars, those cars now. It's crazy.
guess who had one?
So
Paul?
he had a Euro Carrera motored car, which was basically a 2.7 RS motor. And
The whole car was an RS, but the guy went through all the U.S. modifications and completely ruined it.
Oh, no.
Did he? Okay. So you took off the injection probably because it was hard to maintain.
It was impossible to
Yeah, it was
maintain.
impossible to maintain.
That's why I got it so cheap, is because it didn't run.
Yeah, so he took off the injection and he put on Weber's or something, right? He probably put on Weber's, yeah. So, I didn't know this. So I'm just talking to him one day and he goes, how's your car going? And I go, well, it's getting there. We're starting to build the motor, but I'm looking for injection for it. And he goes, well, what kind of injection? And I said, well, Bosch pump mechanical injection. He goes, well, I got that. This is like, that it was like a hen's tooth to find it in the 80s.
Yeah.
It's impossible now. I mean, those pump motors go for like 20,000.
Yeah, he gave me
the
for
pump.
it? Tell him.
So no, well, I didn't. I gave you what you wanted. So I said, "You got it?" He goes, "Yeah, it's in a box somewhere." And I go, well, "What do you got?" He goes, well, "I got the pump and the lines." And I go, "Do you have the stacks?" And he goes, "I don't know if I got the stacks, but maybe he did. I don't remember." But he had the pump. So I said, "Well, what do you want for that?" And he goes, "I don't know, $750, I think, or something."
I think it was $2,000 is what
Was it that?
Yeah,
I don't
was
even
$2,000,
remember.
Yeah,
It was like a couple, whatever it was. I was like, okay.
yeah, to contain his enthusiasm.
I was like, so so I get this injection from him, and I drag it over to my mechanic, and he's just like, "Where did you get this?" And I go, well, "I had this friend of mine that had it." And he goes, "Oh my God!"
He
goes,
just had it? How do you just have one of these?
He goes, "You are so fortunate." So then we had to drill out the heads for the injectors, and he did all that stuff, over a period of decades.
Yeah, decades.
But
Quickly.
we sent the pump out. There's this place, Precision Pump. It's up in Oregon or something.
Yeah.
And anyway, we got it They completely went through it, put in a 2.7 cam in it for a Carrera motor. So basically, I have a Carrera RS motor in that 6, which to a lot of people, they don't know what's that.
Yeah.
But it's an extremely rare and expensive motor.
And the motor I had was fast as fuck. I remember taking Hank Santacola. He came out to visit me one time.
Oh, yeah, Hankster.
Yeah, Henry. He was an awesome guy. He came out to visit, and I picked him up at the airport in that car, and he was shocked. It was faster than his turbo, and I just had carbs on it. But that car had a limited slip rear end. It had all kinds of weight reduction things in it. The guy had modified it to meet US. Every time I registered that car, I had to bring in the book and go through it with the DMV.
What
they would
a
only
hassle.
do 1 year at a time.
Because it didn't have the right VIN.
Didn't have the right VIN, and so I had to go through it every year, and they would always pass it, but it was like a day. You'd make an appointment. It'd be the same guy.
This is back in Virginia?
Yeah. And because it was a gray market car.
Was that a coupe or a Targa?
It was a Targa.
Targa.
Yeah, it was very rare.
That's really rare on a Targa.
Right, but because it was modified, it was polluted, so it didn't matter.
Yeah.
The sad thing about that car, and it had the limited slip rear end.
What year was that? 75?
It was 75, I think so. Yeah.
I think 76 was the last year they built that motor.
And it had the limited slip rear end,
Yeah.
so you would go around a corner, you could hear it go clunk, 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 like that,
Yeah.
which the new ones, they didn't have that. They were just regular. So, I mean, when I punched it, both wheels grabbed.
It's posy in both
Yeah.
wheels. I mean, I've got that on the 6. But
Yeah, and that was very rare as well, So I sold it to a guy, and he let it sit outside.
Oh, God.
And one day he sold it to this girl, and she parked it in some grass, and it went on vacation for a month and came back, opened the door, and it folded in half.
Holy cow.
And so she had it towed to a junkyard. The engine, the transmission, everything went. You can imagine the junkyard guy going, "Oh my God!"
Ching, ching.
Do you know what that car would be worth now restored with the mechanical injection? Probably
Million?
about 250.
250,000?
Yeah. Easy 250.
Holy shit.
Yeah, I really got fucked out of the injection system. The guy who bought it
Yeah,
from
I
me,
know.
yeah, really lowballed me.
Well, at least I put it to good use.
Yeah, it took him 30 years.
I know. Now I'm like almost too old to drive the car. You know?
I can help you with that one.
Put it
yes.
to good use.
What was the
I'll
road?
make sure I get my mechanic to watch this program.
What was the Roadster Speedster in like the late 50s, early 60s?
Oh, the 356.
The 356 Speedster, 55, 56.
That's a cool car.
Yeah, that's a multi-million dollar car now.
and
Okay,
they
wow.
look great, but they're really pigs.
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
they're just upside
sexy.
down bathtub.
Yeah,
You know.
that's why they call them a bathtub. Actually, the drummer in the band that I recorded in that whole thing, he bought one for like $8,000.
A real one?
Yeah, a real one.
God,
And he was restoring it.
Yeah.
He had just put in all the brand new carpet kit in it.
Yeah.
And he was welding on the bottom and caught it on fire.
Holy shit.
Oh no, and it
and
went up.
burned the car up. Yeah,
my
burned it up. But it was like really good shape.
There's so many replicas because they use the VW, right?
They use fiberglass bodies and all that. I mean, James Dean that was the original car.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Before he got the 550 Spider.
The Spider.
Yeah,
Yeah, there was a
that he
guy.
died in.
My dad was really good friends with a guy who used to race a Spider, and
Wow.
yeah, and he was a pretty well-known race car driver, and he used to always come over to our house.
It's just shocking. You think back and you see these guys. There was a guy with a 904 Porsche driving in my neighborhood. Drive it to work.
Yeah.
Like really, or a GT40. There was a guy in my neighborhood. It's just like driving these things on a daily basis. Back then there were $5,000 cars.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Now
They're no value.
Now they're 7+ figures,
Yeah.
millions.
But the same thing happened with audio stuff. There was a period of time when, if I had a Gibson, the hollow body, the 335.
Yeah.
I had a 335 that I found out like a few months ago was like, oh my God, they only made like 100 of those. And I had it and I bought it for X amount of dollars, sold it. My dad bought an ESO Revolta for $3,500.
Yeah.
Fixed a dent in it and sold it for $5,500 and thought, oh my God.
I made a killing.
A friend of mine sent me a picture of my dad's car at an auction. It sold for $280,000.
Wow. Yeah.
Interesting story.
Yeah.
You know Haggerty?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Frank Haggerty was one of our buds when we grew up.
Before he was an auctioneer?
He's the guy that does all the insurance stuff.
Oh.
Haggerty Insurance.
Oh,
The guy
that's-
the Haggerty race cars and the Haggerty
Okay.
all the Haggerty auctions and all that stuff, okay?
Yeah.
He started out collecting cars and he had his insurance company that did household insurance and car insurance, and he started insuring people's cars, you know?
Yeah.
And I grew up with those guys. We spent every weekend at their house. And when I went to my senior prom, he gave me a restored like 1938 like Cadillac or Chevy or whatever, burgundy with a brown leather, big huge the furry like seats. And I mean, he gave me one to take to the prom that he had just
That's
restored.
pretty cool.
Yeah, and this is the guy that I grew up with. Well, it turns out that's the same family. And while I was visiting my friend, his daughter,
Yeah.
they had just gone public. They were worth like $3.2 billion. And she slipped and fell in her living room, hit the corner of the counter, and died.
Wow. That's
And while we were there,
my
they went to the funeral. I wasn't even
God.
prepared to do that. Yeah. But that's the same company. That's the Haggerty people. And it was just so like he was just such a awesome guy when we grew up. He was just so nice to all of us.
See, that applies to Paul's story about driving the car to work, though. Why not enjoy it? Because you could be dead in
I'd
10
rather
seconds.
buy a car that's a year old that already has the fucking I want to kill myself dent in it than a new one.
That's true. That brand new car, it's just downhill from there.
Yep.
I love your
You know?
Tesla. That thing's cool.
That's a nice car.
Have you seen this? The moonroofs in those? It's literally like you're looking through.
Yeah, the
ceiling
funny
of
thing
glass.
is I put foil. I made this like insulator because it's so hot on my head. I put foil and I put insulation, then I put batting, and I put it up there permanently. Cause
What model do you have?
I have a 3,
Oh,
but I have an
okay.
early 3 where you got a lot of stuff for free. I got the garage door opener thing, which is now an option.
Yeah.
But I have the full autonomous.
You got the
piloting
steering
for
package.
$3,000.
They're 12 now. Because I just took a test drive last weekend.
Yeah.
You did?
And I was extremely impressed.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I
wanna
mean,
get
that
one.
could be the next car.
That's a car.
It was a
There's
Y.
actually a company that makes kits for those things, front end kits that make them look really cool.
Yeah, it's StarTech.
Yeah, StarTech.
Yeah, it's a Brabus
Yeah.
company. Yeah.
It's really cool. But
Those
that
are
car,
rad.
you know, I'm really happy with the car. I think, you know, Tesla's kind of a loose cannon. He just says dumb things, but the guy deep down inside makes a lot of the right decisions. You look at his companies.
Yeah.
And his company was, you know, and they say, "Oh, this company already existed. He just took them over because they were failing." Nobody sells a company unless somebody irritates the fuck out of them or they're ready to go out of business. That's just how it is. So he bought that. Those guys were ready to sell. They were probably, you know, a lot of times when you run a business, you reach the point where you just can't get any bigger. You don't have the wherewithal, the knowledge to go to that next level. Like, you know, you look at like Sweetwater. He took that company to what it is because his vision continually growed with it. But you've got a lot of people that can't ever get past that point. It just
Yeah.
it's enough for them.
Or they need a new person with vision.
Yeah, and so, you know, and so he took that over. The same with the SpaceX thing. I mean, he's the guy bringing people back from the space station.
Yeah.
Russia's not going to do it.
Yeah.
He did that. He pulled that off. You know, he 3D printed the first rocket engine.
Elon.
Yeah.
Plus, he
Amazing.
just bought Twitter, and now we can all actually
We can
not
all say fuck.
have our voices
Fuck, fuck, fuck,
silenced
fuck, fuck,
by
fuck, fuck, fuck.
bots and algorithms.
Yeah, but I mean, it's you know, the car it's a nice car. I mean, I really enjoy driving it, and I'll tell you, just the autopilot part of it, not the autonomous part, but the
Yeah.
autopilot part of it. When I'm on the freeway, because when I would drive down from Buellton or Santa Barbara area to
Yeah.
here, when I'd come down to work, and I'd do that every week. I'd drive down and I'd go back. I would get in my car from my house, and you know how when you leave your house, and then by the time you get here, you're like,
Beat up.
you want to go upstairs. I need a half an hour.
Yeah.
No calls. And you just sit up there going like, fuck, 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 fuck.
Yeah.
You know, I would get out of my car and feel exactly like how I got into it.
Yeah.
Because
Oh, nice.
I wasn't dealing with the idiots. It was slowing down. It was changing lanes, doing everything on its own. And the thing that I noticed was I could look to the right and left of me, and I could see someone on their phone. And so I would go over to the next lane because I knew that guy was going to drift into me at some point. I didn't have to watch in front of me because it was handled.
Yeah.
That's so,
So
crazy.
I could notice everything around me, and I enjoyed the drive. And these pictures of these people falling asleep and stuff, it's all bullshit. And most of them, you'll always see they got sunglasses on. That's because they're watching where they're going. But they have to wiggle the encoders at some point. Every 2 minutes, you have to do something
have
to
to
tell the
interact
car
with
you're
it.
there, or
Yeah.
it won't continue to drive.
Yeah.
And these guys that are in the back seat, you can hang the orange from one side or something, and it pulls the steering slightly to one side, so there's always tension on the servo, so it thinks you're there. Yeah, that kind of works. But it's like,
Who would want to do
just
that?
just to be a dick,
Yeah.
and it's so stupid.
Other auto companies want to wreck Tesla's rep by doing those things.
Well, what
That's
happens
why
is
those
you get-
videos go viral
The
to,
very
to
first
trash
one.
them.
The very first one was the guy driving on the 5. He was doing 90 miles an hour and crashes into the barrier. He was drunk and all this kind of shit. Okay, I can tell you exactly what happened. And Tesla changed the way they did things. But it used to be you had to do this. And like with flying faders, if you take your fingernail and push on the fader, you know how it pushes back? And there's a point where you push it and it just lets go because the servo just it turns it off, so there's no more resistance. With the Tesla, you pull on it, it has tension, okay? So when it starts beeping at you, you have to wiggle the steering wheel a little bit to tell it that you're there. And that's how it knows, because the servo wants you to stay here and you're pulling it this way. So it goes like this, and it notices that change, and it says, okay, he's manipulating the steering wheel. He's still awake, so we'll continue to drive. But what happens is if you have an evasive situation and you pull on it, it'll pull so far, then disengage, okay? But the problem is, it's like if I pull on your arm, okay, and then you release it, I'll punch myself in the face because that tension got released, but I've got force, okay? So what this guy was doing, he was drunk. He'd be driving along, and he'd get up there, and he'd put his hand on the steering wheel, pull down a little bit on it, okay? It would recognize it and would continue driving, all right? What he did is he pulled down on it too hard, and it disengaged, and so his hand goes like this, and he went right like that into the barrier.
Really?
That's what happened, okay?
Yeah.
And so in most of those accidents, that's what's happened. It's that type of thing where you disengage. So they went to the encoders now. So now all you have to do is just spin the encoders.
That's
You don't have
little
to pull-
wheels?
The little wheels. You
Yeah.
don't have to turn the wheel. And then about every 20 minutes, you have to actually disengage and re-engage it.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, because it
Okay.
won't just stay on forever.
Wow.
Now the big problem with the autonomous driving thing is you have to pass the safety test, so it monitors your driving, and so there's a lot of things that are wrong with it. Like if someone pulls in front of you, you have to brake. It considers that as bad driving, but it's not necessarily your fault. So that part of it's kind of fucked up. But most of the states aren't allowing it right now.
What model are you looking at?
Model Y.
Oh,
That's a nice car.
what's
We
that?
have one of those too.
What's the
It's-
SUV one?
That's an
there's two.
SUV.
Oh, the Y.
Yeah.
is.
The
Okay,
Y is an
that's what I
SUV.
want.
They have a
It's
Y
kind
and
of
they
like
have the
my,
X.
Mercedes.
Yeah. Those
But
are cool.
you know what I loved about the car? It's just so smooth.
And
There's
fun.
none of this jerkiness, shifting gears and and I thought I would miss the sound, but the
Yeah.
little sputter.
Well, you can make
back-
fart sounds outside the car.
Probably, yeah.
You can. Well, they have it set up. You can do that.
Do they?
Yeah, and you can make fart sounds in the car too. You can move the whoopee cushion to the back seat, and you push the right encoder, and it goes. And then the person in the back
kidding
is
me?
like,
didn't know
it's
that.
hilarious. Oh yeah, the other thing at Jingle Bells, the Christmas mode, where you you put it on, and every time you hit the turn signal, it jingle
Oh,
bells.
ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, and
ding,
you there's a
ding,
light
ding.
show mode. There's the disco mode. There's all
Oh,
these
it's
different
like
things. It's
cool and
a lot of
funny.
fun, and you can switch the map to be Mars, and you're the Mars, that little robot, and you're driving along Mars, and it's like, but your directions will still tell you where to go.
That's
so you're driving,
so
but it's just
rad.
this big orange blob, But it's it's nice. I mean, it's very well laid out, and I'll tell you what, it's punchier than fuck.
It's
You
Oh,
have
that
the-
thing's
ridiculously fast.
I drove the performance one.
It's scary.
It's rocket fast.
It's
yeah.
insane.
I can't imagine what that plaid's like.
It is
That must
it
be
is
out of control.
100% torque anytime you want.
And nothing can beat it. I watch these YouTubes. 720 McLarens, they can't beat a Tesla. I mean, nothing.
Really?
There's nothing on the planet that
Because
apparently
you have 100% torque. You don't have to
Yeah.
get in the power curve. You have 100%
No
torque off the
spool up.
line.
My lease is up June 1st, and I was gonna look at the BMW X7, but
you
do
got to
save
go
a
drive.
ton?
You got to go drive one.
I've drove.
They give
drove
it
the
to you.
smaller
They
one.
let you drive it. They gave me it for like half hour.
By yourself?
Oh yeah.
Wow,
Just
that's
take the
cool.
car. Well, they take your
Yeah, of course.
license
But
and information.
it's
so
not like
you
a 5
make sure you
minute
come back
with the dealer guy.
But
Yeah, I mean that.
Do you save big money on the gas too?
What's that?
Do you save big money annually?
Oh, I pay about probably $5.60 a month for
I
electricity.
spent $400 on gas. I drive every morning, but
Well, you think about this, okay? Now, when I was driving down here, because I had the Cayman, remember?
Yeah, oh yeah.
I had the Cayman S, and I would drive down here, and it would cost me $90 every week
Wow.
to drive down here and back.
and that was
okay?
10 years ago.
Well, yeah, no, it was 5 years ago.
Okay.
You know, so you take that times 4. All right, you're talking about almost $400 Now,
Times 12.
times 12. But you look at $400 a month you're paying on gas. All right,
Yeah.
you look at the payment of a Tesla that might be $680, and you go, oh, I can't afford that. And it's like, actually, you can because you're paying $280,
Right.
Because you're
Plus
already
there's,
paying $400.
plus there's no maintenance.
There's no oil.
Oh,
the
wow, I forgot
brakes.
about
And there's
that.
no.
That's
They
cool.
said the brakes last 100,000 miles because of the regenerative. thing
I
they
don't
got.
even use the brakes.
Well, that's. I know you just let off and it slows down and stops.
Yeah, and then when it stops, it goes into hold.
Yeah. No, it's
I
there's
wanna
no
get one.
maintenance because
That's
they said
amazing.
the only thing you're going to have to do is tires. It's like nothing.
And the tires are actually pretty good, except
it's-
Anita blew one out yesterday for no reason. But Tesla came and got it and picked it up and fixed it and brought
They
it.
did?
Yeah, because
they do all that.
they do. They're really pros. They sent an Uber for her
Wow.
to pick it up.
Whoa.
They paid for it, and she had to buy the tire, but they did everything else was free.
He owns that
Right.
company.
Yeah, and they do all the updates on everything, and it does.
That's just over the air, right?
Yeah, it's all over the air. It's great.
Yeah.
I mean, you do upgrade, and it's one of those things that the updates they have don't like brick your computer. They're really good. They have some really cool features they do. They always improve everything, and they get feedback from the way you drive, and so they're constantly improving everything you're doing. So it's a
So
constant
crazy.
cycle, but it's amazing.
Two quick questions.
Mm-hmm.
Can we take the Porsche to Santa Barbara for the Smashing Pumpkins concert on the 13th? Would I even fit in it?
Why would you want to do that? Because it'll get destroyed.
Why would it get destroyed?
It's a marathon.
What's a marathon?
Well,
Any
it's-
concert.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a track car.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you wouldn't fit in it very well. No, I mean
6'3",
seriously,
250.
because it's got a roll bar in back of the seat, and it restricts the seat on your side. And
I saw it
if
last
you're-
year when you
if you're-
drove it that
if
one
you're
day.
5'8" or 9, you're okay. If you're 6 foot, forget it.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I had mine, I could come around off the GW Parkway, and I would do. They had a banked ramp, which is really unusual, and I would drift around that onto the Key Bridge at about. I'd hit a 1K tone, just, and I'd drift onto there. Then we had the Whitehurst Freeway, which is elevated freeway, and then the bayou was underneath, and there was a ramp that went off that was never finished. So they just had this like thin barrier, and then there was a cement factory right below it. So if you fucked up, you ended up.
Oh, you're in the cement. You're in the
cement
grinder.
factory. You're dead. I would hit that corner at like 90 and drift around the corner, and then hit the Key Bridge, and then right before the exit for the thing, you had to slow down and turn. I would e-brake it and drift sideways, and then hit that thing. And by the time I got to the end, I would make 2 corrections. I almost got that bridge like this, just about straight.
Perfect,
2 minor
yeah.
corrections. Get to the end. I was doing 100 miles an hour. Get to this little cross street because there's a divider, and I would put the e-brake on and slide through the cross street into the other side of the road, and then go down, go down the road
Like Austin
underneath
Powers.
onto Water Street, and then slide into my parking spot. Wow. And I would do that every fucking day.
Wow. That's crazy.
You
That's
could
funny.
not tip that car over. And it was perfectly balanced, so you could
50-50,
drift.
yeah.
Yeah, you can drift. Oh my God, it's such a great car to drift in.
They weigh
Camry-
nothing. My
Yeah,
car weighs in
1800,
it like
1780.
1,980
yeah,
pounds.
Yeah,
Oh,
1980.
do you feel it kind of? when
No,
you hit it?
it's-
Oh, no,
solid.
no. It's a very stable car.
Corners on
and
rails?
Yeah, corners on
Oh,
rails.
yeah.
And when you get a motor that's got 250 horsepower, the horsepower to weight ratio is like incredible. So
I had a Momo in it, Momo steering wheel, and that steering wheel a lot of times was like this because I bent it, holding on to it for dear life, going around corners.
Paul Wolff can be found at fixaudiodesigns.com. Last question. What's your favorite recording studio? You've been in them all.
Been in all. When I go into a studio, the first thing I do is I listen. I smell. I want to see what it smells like. And when I go down the hallway of this studio, it smells like my whole life. Electronics.
Studio 3, right?
It has a sound. Yeah, it has a smell to it.
Everybody says that.
I really do like this studio. This is my favorite place. I mean, I've been to a lot of them. A lot of the, like East West has the same historical content to it. You go in there and you have the same kind of a vibe. But this is I just like this, and it's our history. I mean, it's always been friendly to me. I can come in here and bring somebody into the studio, want to take the wall apart and show them the chamber without anybody giving me any shit. I couldn't do that anywhere else, anywhere I go.
That's only you that can do that.
Yeah, I know.
He's got the A pass.
But it's
home studios like Greg's studio. I love his studio. It's a nice home studio. I enjoy that place.
No,
but
commercial ones,
as a facility goes, I really like this place.
Well, it's so astonishing though because there's no corporate sponsors or it's never been sold. It's just him and his dad. For
this
6
is
decades.
Yeah. This is an interesting thing because the history of this. And you told me in early days when your dad and Walt Disney were best friends, and your dad says to Walt Disney, "Let's make a recording studio." Walt Disney goes, "Why the fuck would anybody want to do that?"
Yeah, exactly.
And he goes, "Well, what do you want to do?" He says, "I want to make a theme park." And then he had it all done on like a 4x8 piece of plywood, this model,
so
and your dad's looking at it like, how are you going to make any money doing this? Oh no, I got this whole. I mean, this is visionary stuff, you know. And your dad did every like soundtrack to every Disney movie that existed.
Yeah, that and some of the rides and
Yeah.
Annette Funicello and oh my god,
He grew up around all this stuff. And when Jimmy Messina worked here, Jimmy was the only person that his dad would allow to go into a session with because Jimmy didn't allow drugs in the control room. And so he would let Paul come and watch him do sessions.
Which
Wow, I
was
never
Buffalo
heard that story.
Springfield.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you were in on the Crosby Joni Mitchell session.
Yeah, that was Buffalo. Well, actually, it was Buffalo Springfield. It was, Crosby with Stephen Stills, and they were winding down Buffalo Springfield. I think they're doing Last Time Around, and David had a girl with him, and it was Joni. Yeah,
Gosh, that stuff just gets me. I love that.
It's
history.
funny. My brother befriended Carly Simon's mom. He met her in New York when he worked at the Times. He was an artist. He did a lot of their sports pages. He did all the drawings they did.
Yeah.
And he was friends with her, and she actually got him his first gig there. She didn't really say, "I want you to use this guy." She just said, "Hey, there's this artist that you should know. He's really good." Because he met her somehow, and he would go out and stay with her in the summers at her house. And I didn't know that she was Simon and Schuster. I just knew that she was Carly's mom and dad, and James Taylor and stuff. So I went up there to visit my brother, and I stayed there with them. And she made her house was just full of all pictures, like it was every president. I'm going like, holy shit, nicest lady on the face of the earth, And one of the things that when I grew up, I never liked to eat peas ever. I hated peas. So we go up there. I come there. We talk and stuff like that. And what does she make for lunch?
Pea soup.
with
Pea soup
with bacon in it.
Oh, that sounds
and
good.
I ate every bit of it. And then she asked me if I wanted more because, you want to be polite. Right. It was actually pretty good. It was actually good. But my brother told me afterwards, he said, "I've never seen you so humble in your life. I have to hand it to you. You really did the right thing." And that was my experience. But she was a sweetheart. She was really nice. But
great.
it was when you meet those people and you're friends with, like with Jimmy, he's one of my best friends. I did his last record with him, and he's just the nicest guy there is. I mean, I go to his house. I get a phone call the other day. Okay, I'm in my office. I get a phone call, and I miss the phone call, so I pick it up and I play the message. You know what the message is?
Nice.
But we have a lot of fun. I mean, we do. He's got a wood shop and a metal shop. We make everything. We do. I've modified all of his guitar amps, and I go out live with him a lot of times because I really enjoy it.
We're coming down there next month. Paul's never been to Nashville.
Yeah.
Damn it! You
before
need
you-
to do that.
You need to show me
Go out
around.
to Jimmy's house and we'll have a barbecue.
He's got horses too, right?
Damn it! Yeah, Michaela is she's like the animal whisperer. She has the greatest animals, and we get our eggs from them, and duck eggs and chicken eggs.
Holy
They
cow.
just got this field dog.
Duck eggs.
This white. Oh, they're great. They're like bigger and thicker and creamier. They're really good. But
Really?
she's got this dog who's kind of like it's a farm dog. You know, it's white, furry. I don't know what kind it is, but and she is literally the animal whisperer. She has names for all the ducks. They all recognize her. They talk to her. I mean, it's just amazing to see this, And so she gets this dog. She posts this picture of one of the horses nuzzling the dog's neck. And the dog is just like this. And she ends up with it because you got a problem with like animals, eating the chickens and stuff. So this dog that's what they're for.
Oh,
And the dog stays out with the animals, but the dog plays with all the animals. It's so incredible.
Wow.
Yeah.
Paul Wolff is at fixaudiodesigns.com. Our preamps will be available in the coming weeks, month.
Yeah, because I'm getting all the parts again for the next run of them. More this time.
We'll advertise that on our social media. It is our 60-year anniversary. You can go to sunsetsoundstore.com, pick up a T-shirt. I think this is very well done today, and appreciate you coming in. And we learned about API.
Yeah.
We learned about
It's good
Porsche.
to see you again, Paul.
I know, it's been 2 years, literally.
It's been a while.
I know. It's the first thing I did when I got here is I went over to Love to Eat Thai and ate my lunch.
Yeah.
That was
Your favorite place?
My favorite place, yeah. I remember the first day I brought you there, and you said, I'll have what he's having, and it was like,
Yeah.
I didn't say a word, and when you got it was like fire in his mouth.
I know. I'm like, this isn't mild.
Well, Anita cooks, great Thai food, so I'm used to the hot
Yeah.
stuff. So.
Did you turn Dweezil Zap onto that?
Yeah, and actually I went up to his house one night, and I just said, I called him up and I said, what are you guys doing for dinner? And he goes, we haven't really decided yet. Well, I'm going to go by the greatest Thai place on the face of the earth. I'll bring you something. Just pick whatever you want and tell me what it is. He goes, oh, okay. So they look at the menu online, and he calls me back, tells me, and I bring it. And so we're sitting in his kitchen, we're eating this stuff, and he goes like, this is like really good. This is like really good. And now apparently it's his favorite place. Everybody's, it's
How do you not like it?
Yeah, I know. It's the greatest Thai food on the face
What's
of
the other one we go to?
There isn't another one.
We go to a different one. That's like a little.
Renga's another one.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's. Cheaper.
Oh yeah, there was another studio that I liked as good as this one. You have a favorite restaurant, and that's the end of it. That's your favorite restaurant. Love to eat Thai.
No,
on
Ren does
Eat
it. The tech because he's
Yeah, the
cheapskate.
tech.
He likes to go to the different one.
Yeah, that's good food. They have
Better
Thai,
cut that out.
yeah, they have Thai tea pudding there. They don't make it anymore, but oh my god, that was so good.
Yeah.
They have the mango sticky rice. Anita makes that. Anita makes a really good sticky rice and mango.
She'll make it when
Takes
we
her
come
all
down there.
fucking day to make that stuff. It's
Wow.
like you got to cook the rice, then you got to let it sit, then you got to talk to it, and then you got to put it in a bag, and you got to have the special, looks like a hat that they wear, the straw hat. You got to have the steamer hat, and then you got to, and it's like this whole process, But when you eat it, it's like, oh my god, this is good. Same with sushi rice. You don't just make rice and then make sushi. It's got to be this whole process, and it's like, ugh. Yeah, she got us through COVID with her cooking.
With cooking.
And it was a different dish every night. She just got into this thing. It was like, what else could you do?
Yeah.
We still don't go to the grocery store. We still have the groceries delivered.
That's nice.
Because it's just turned into this thing. It's like, fuck it. Why waste 2 hours of your life going to a store and just, to be disappointed?
That's a roundtable.